Call this meeting of the Davenport Community School District Board of Directors to order. Director Kluhl, would you please read our board priorities?
I'd be glad to. The priorities of the Davenport Community School District Board of Education are to, 1, provide leadership and direction to improve the overall learning environment in our classrooms, schools, and district, including the health, safety, security, and perhaps most of all, the happiness of students and staff. Number 2, direct and support actions, programs, and activities which reduce the impacts of poverty on our students, their families, and our community.
Thank you. Director Snyder, would you please read our mission and vision statements?
Our mission statement is to enhance each student's ability by providing a quality education enriched by our diverse community. And our vision statement reads, education that challenges conventional thinking, prepares all students to compete in a global society, and inspires our students, parents, staff, and the community to answer the question, what if?
Thank you. Superintendent Tate, we have a showcase with Monroe Elementary.
Yes, thank you, Board of Directors. Monroe Elementary will be presenting the showcase, and I call on Principal Sneckcloth. Thank you for being here. Appreciate it.
Where's the technology guy? Oh, there we go. As I told Dr. Tate earlier, there will be no singing or dancing or anything like that tonight. Just kind of a talk about how we are breaking the poverty barriers at Monroe Elementary School. Just before we get started, Monroe Elementary School is located just south of the Putnam. We are a 100% free and reduced lunch school. We are a home to hardworking families, people that are very interested in a better life for their kids than maybe that they have, or continuing a hardworking life that they have. The majority of the poverty that we see is situational and generational poverty. So as we go through our conversations tonight, that will be the focus of ours. Some influential texts to the thinking at Monroe. Work hard, be nice. Those are the Knowledge is Power program schools, the KIPP schools that are all over the country. Eric Jensen, Engaging Students with Poverty in Mind. That was a book that was suggested by our recent diversity speaker that the district has brought in, and it's been a very good resource. Whatever It Takes, Jeffrey Canada, the Harlem School Zone. Very interesting story. And the Annual Growth for All and Catch-Up Growth. This has been a book that we have studied as a building leadership team, and it just talks about what do you need to do and to have annual growth, and what do you need to do to catch students up. So these are books that are very influential at Monroe. The key factors to breaking the cycle that we are going about is, number 1, relationships. Before you can do anything, my kid's sister has a saying, and I don't know if she made it up or if she found it, but it's called, when all else fails, relationships prevail. And that is so true. When everything hits the fan, if the parent or family or teacher or student know that you care about them, you will be able to find a solution. The school is seen as a community resource. That's something that I know in Davenport, at Madison and at Monroe and other schools. The school is not just a place for educating their children. It's a place that you can have family and community nights. It's a place that you can possibly go and get some food or help or apply online for a GED in our family involvement room. There are parents in there monthly that are updating their resume or applying online. And so it's a community resource. Probably the number 1 job that we are assigned to is attack the language gap. And I know it's one of your priorities to study the poverty issue in our district, and the language gap that our students face is incredible. And so our number 1 task is to attack that language gap. And then I found this quote to be very interesting, or this thought, is whatever it takes to close the everything gap. Many of our students, it's not just a language gap, it's a clothing gap, it's a fooding gap, it's a housing gap, it's a transportation gap. I thought that was an interesting quote, the everything gap. And so sometimes when you're faced with a family that has, say for example, a lice infestation in their house, you need different resources to close that gap to get their children feeling comfortable and safe again. And so you really have to have an out-of-the-box type mentality to close the everything gap. Probably the biggest asset that we utilize to help attack the barriers of poverty are our community partners. And in the West End, Jeff's Car Corner, the 180 Zone, United Way, the Mallards, and the Bettendorf Christian Church are some of our biggest allies. They help solve difficult situations. I'll give you an example. The other day, I have a dad who is fighting for the custody of his children, and if he doesn't turn his situation around, and he's trying, that DHS will step in and they'll take the children and put them in a different place. He works a full-time job. He's doing everything he can. He needed to prove that he has a suitable place to live. I called Bettendorf Christian Church, and in one day they supplied his house with couches, beds, and made it a nice livable space for his family. And that's the everything gap. So these organizations really do help us out with that, and I'll mention in what ways as we move forward. They provide very valuable resources. We have a partner from the 180 Zone. Him and his wife, it's their mission to break these barriers down for the families at Monroe and Monroe only. So much that he's a successful realtor. He sold his house in Bettendorf and now lives 2 blocks away from Monroe in a house right down in the West End. And right where his house is, the pride that's going on around his house is incredible. And so I could call him right now and tell him I need a pair of shoes, and he'll go get me a pair of shoes. Or I have a family that needs something. He can take care of that, right? Him and his wife can take care of that. Tutoring and mentoring, part of the 180 Zone, they're latching themselves on to families, and they're mentoring families. Some of the changes that I've seen, and their motto of our 180 Zone people is don't be afraid of small beginnings. So they start small, they see if it will work, and then they replicate it on a bigger scale. So they do tutoring, they do mentoring, and they mentor the students, and they mentor the families, and they have very difficult conversations with them sometimes, because sometimes that's needed. Basic needs are met by this. Every year, Jeff's Car Corner puts on a Thanksgiving meal at Monroe Elementary School, and he'll serve anybody as long as they come. And it's family seating. We have the gym full, and it's catered by Jersey Grill. So clothing, household items. Some of the things our community partners are doing. We had a vacation Bible school at Monroe, and there were 30 people. There was perfect attendance for those that came on the first day all the way through. And in the summer on a weekly night, that's tough. The 180 Zone provides weekly dinners to our families. They do those on Saturday mornings and Thursday nights, and crafts. Probably one of the most excited things that I just found out about is that they're providing scholarships to West End families. So they're extremely committed to this beginning to end and providing hope. Continued, our Boy Scouts. We've never had Boy Scouts in a fashion where it can continue, and the 180 Zone is bringing the Boy Scouts in. We had our first Boy Scout night the other night. Sports teams, they're looking at recreating like a traveling sports team at our school. Transportation, another tough issue is the extended of our walking zones. They're looking at creative ways to attack that attendance problem of students walking great distances. And this last one is very powerful. I sat down with the leaders of the 180 Zone, and they're looking at purchasing houses around the Monroe Smart Attendance area and making them development centers where where mentors can go and mentor families and students all the way from elementary school all the way up to high school, and show them and that it's possible, and then introduce them to the scholarships. So I was so excited about that, because when somebody comes in and cleans up a house and turns it into a great place to live, now everything around it is affected by that. one of the really cool initiatives that's going on at Monroe right now is we are the first in the Quad Cities, the first school-based food pantry. And here today, our volunteers were there getting the food pantry ready for tomorrow. The food pantry is the second Tuesday and the fourth Tuesday of every month when things are typically a little bit tougher for families. And we hand select those families that are trying to break the cycle for themselves. And we invite them in non-threatening times. And as you can see back there, we just converted one of our closets into a pantry. They deliver the food, they set it up, and families get to select a food item, vegetables and different kinds of food items. It's a very respectful way to say, hey, we recognize the fact that you're trying to break this cycle for you and your family. Bettendorf Christian Church donated a freezer and a refrigerator. And not only do they get to take home canned goods and other goods, they get to take home meat and other produce that way that we can keep fresh. And it's on a basis, depending on what they get at the food bank, if they get a order of fresh strawberries will come. And so those are some really unique, out-of-the-box things that could turn into great opportunities and continue to grow from there. Now, the second part of this, I'm going to talk about what our school is doing to attack the poverty gap. I thought this was a very interesting quote from Eric Jensen. It's up to us to upgrade children's operating systems or prepare to see a downgrade in their performance. I thought that was an incredible way to think about an impoverished brain, because it's not a destiny that just because you come from poverty that you're not capable of changing. You absolutely are capable of changing. Some of the programs that we have going on at Monroe right now to attack this, direct instruction and the teacher leadership compensation, that has had a bigger impact immediately already than I had anticipated. I'll share with you my last picture. This is one of my brand new teachers, and my lead teacher, she's explicitly modeling for this teacher how to implement this reading program to a couple of our most at-risk students. And that right there will immediately change the teacher's practice and help attack that language gap. So one of our biggest hurdles that we face is our attendance. Last year, our average daily attendance was 92%. And if you average that out, every kid takes 12 days off. And some of our most chronic attenders, up into the 60 days missed and down into the 20s. So we partnered with the United Way and we wrote a grant. Madison and Monroe had the two lowest attendance in Davenport. And so we wrote a grant, and the grant is based around the research that if you reward people for showing up to school and point out the positives of being at school, and all of this comes from the Attendance Works website. And so we do celebrations every month. We do competitions in between grade levels. The Mallards are partnered with us with this. So once a month, the Mallards are going to come out and hand out the trophies to each class by grade level, and the class with the best attendance in the school and the class with the most improved attendance, they'll get to eat lunch with the Mallards. And so we are really going about it in a positive way, pointing out the positives of being at school. We also, through this grant, have 2 people assigned every day to evaluate our attendance data. And we do home visits every night, every other night, if not every night. And we are meeting with families, and already it's kind of raising the sense of urgency that school is important. Celebrating. We're doing much more celebrations of our students. Probably one of our biggest initiatives this year as a staff is Boys Town. Boys Town it's not a new program, but it's a program that allows you to systematically address behavior issues. A lot of times students come to school with behavior issues that they don't have skill set for. So they must be taught this skill set. And that's exactly what Boys Town is. It's a way to teach replacement behaviors. Our district, under the direction of Dr. Tate, we have a district wraparound program that provides support and levels of resources that aren't seen at any other building. school-based therapists to help with issues that are bigger than our school. One of the biggest things that I've noticed in the last 5 years are our summer programs. Our summer programs are rich learning environments. I've noticed in doing my data digs, and as the year starts, the gap is smaller in our kindergarten, first, and second graders because of the work that's going on in the summer programs. Julie Szewski in her office, they put together really tight programs using 95% group, being their experiences to help close that gap. One of the things that's going on right now is we're writing a grant to keep KinderJump. There's a certain population of students at Monroe that never attend preschool, and they show up on the first day of kindergarten, never having been in a structured environment, never having stayed, had to focus for as long as they are in school. And so what we do at Roundup, we spread the word. We'll knock on doors. We'll hand out flyers, stick notes in people's backpack, that for 4 weeks in the summer you can come from 7 to noon, have a breakfast, learn how to operate in a school, and then have lunch and go home. Our KinderJump students are our leaders when they come to our school, and not the people that are so much farther behind. One of the things that was a byproduct of that we didn't anticipate was we identify students that are able to go to school, but emotionally and mentally they would really benefit from another year of preschool, and so we're able to better service our families that way. Our after-school programs with Stepping Stones, monthly family nights, the title events, and our GAP program that Dr. Tate has implemented has really given our kids another dose of attacking that language barrier. So those are some of the big things that we have going on to break our poverty barrier. And I kind of threw all that at you at once, so I apologize. But now's the time for if you have any questions or comments.
Any comments or questions from the board? Director Kluhl.
Well, Principal Schneckloff, you made it very clear that these really aren't barriers but impediments along the path, and I'm thinking of all the work you're doing in terms of grants and partnerships, things that we couldn't do if we relied on our general fund stream alone. It just wouldn't happen, and I'm sure that you didn't mention Davenport Schools, but the foundation, but I'm sure that they're heavily involved as well. I'm wondering, I know that you're crowded there at Monroe. If there's something, what could we do as a board to help you? And I know money is always, something that would help, but if there's something specific, I think it's important to note that for the community that although you're taking on a lot of responsibility here, in fact, this is a community problem. And we're just one agency that tries to change the lives of these kids along the way. But what can happen with the community and with the engagement that you've got is the opportunity to actually break the cycle. And once we can get these kids through Monroe Elementary, having been respected and not disrespected, we're actually creating a whole cohort of children who will become parents, who will say school was a good experience. And that will make such a difference, I think. But if there's something that the board could do for Monroe School, what would it be?
One of the things that is a big barrier are just our class space available. Now, if you look at it through the perspective of how many kids do you have and how many classrooms you have, it appears that we have enough space. But when you are trying to take your lowest class, cut it in half, use your title funds to lower that class size down, have direct instruction for 120 minutes, and we've got people in corners, offices, anywhere that we can squeeze a desk. So, and actually, Director Mike Maloney has been down to assess that situation and gave some very good ideas about that. But that would be probably one of our biggest facility barriers, is just the actual classroom space.
And the demographics of the Monroe area, is your population expanding? Are you seeing more students every year?
We have approximately 75 more students than we had 5 years ago.
Okay. Thank you.
Anybody else? Director Cromedy.
Well, first of all, thank you, TJ, for that presentation, and thank you for everything that you're doing down at Monroe related to this poverty issue. As you mentioned, this is one of our 2 board goals, and 3 of us here on the board are on a committee to deal with the poverty issue. And one of the things I'm learning from being on this committee is that we are already doing many things in our district that I don't think we as a board are aware of, like some of the initiatives that you talked about tonight. Sarah Harris and Ellen Riley are both on a part of our committee, and they have brought to our attention some of the things that we're doing district-wide that I was not aware of, and I think other members of our committee was not aware of. So I am just really pleased to hear some of the initiatives that are going on, and we still have a lot of work to do. We've brought in several people from our community to assist us with this goal, and we will probably expand that. And I applaud you, and I'm sure there are other things going on in other schools that, Dr. Tate, I hope we can hear about those, because I think that's going to help this committee in moving us forward in doing something about our poverty issue that we're trying to deal with. One of the things that we talked about in our committee, and the very first thing that we talked about, and it was the very first thing you talked about tonight, is relationships, and how important relationships are, that dealing with those relationships right away when a family walks into the school is so important, that if you don't develop a relationship from the very first minute that they step into the building, it's either going to take a long, long time to do it, or it's not going to happen. I guess I'd like to hear from you, how do you do that at Monroe? When a family, and you know it's probably a family that's a family in need, and a poverty family, that how do you go about dealing with those individual families? Because that's the information I would like to know as a board member, because I think we need some consistency across this district to make that kind of thing happen across the district. So I'd like to hear from you on that.
Well, the number one thing for me is you have to be willing to forgive, and you have to be willing to have a difficult conversation. So I'll give you an example. Today I had an IEP meeting, and this family member that I know, she canceled. And I called her back and I said, I'm coming to get you. Be ready in 10 minutes. And if she would have said, no, truly I can't, I would have been fine. But she said, okay, fine, you know me too well. And so if that's been a pattern that I've seen, this mom truly cares about her kids, but sometimes that's the relationship that I have with her. You can never give up, and when you have a rough interaction, that family member always has to be willing to come back. You always have to open your arms. You have to open up with open arms and allow that family to come back. Listen to both sides. Communicating, in my opinion, is very clear. And also, you kind of have to have a mindset that you're meeting people where they are. And so if you have a family that is trying to break the cycle, and they're trying to do, where they are now might not be the end goal, but you have to meet families where they are and support. The key thing for me to keep in mind, and our staff to keep in mind, is when are we enabling and when are we helping. And so there's a fine line. I just had a conversation today with one of our new teachers that, okay, this is where we talk to the parents and family members about this is their responsibility. Now let's help get them there. We can't enable them along the way, but we hold accountable and work together in that partnership. And when you do that over time, that spreads in your community. that, yeah, he cares, he's not going to enable you, that kind of thing, or the staff members there, they really do care if you put forth a little bit of the effort, kind of meeting halfway, so to speak. And it truly is a fine line of enabling versus, because we could have a food pantry there and people would take advantage of it. That, you know, so we have to meet our families where they are and help change the best that we know how to do, break that cycle for our families. So for me, it's that relationship, having difficult conversations, because our families will come in and tell us when we've messed up. And so we got to be able to say, hey, I'm not sure that that's the best avenue, or no, an IEP meeting is very important. If you wait one more day, this will expire, that kind of thing. So those are the kinds of conversations. But you got to also, it was pouring down rain, and how's mom going to get here 4 blocks away? So
That leads me to my next question. Do you have preschool at Monroe?
we do not.
Okay. So what do you think the issue is with not having preschool? Is it space within the building? Is it getting kids to preschool?
It's 100% space.
Space. Okay.
I get asked probably monthly, hey, you got a room down there? So there were, when I first started at Monroe, there were 2 preschools there. We also have, you know, an ESL population. We also have, you know, so some of those things are things that take up some of our space in our building, not take up, but are utilized in our building. So yeah, I would say the main reason for not having a preschool program is space.
So if we don't have space at Monroe and those kiddos aren't getting to preschool, or are they getting to other preschools? Are they able to get to the centers? Are they able to get to private preschools? Or are they kids that you talked about come into kindergarten without any experience? Do you have a number of those at Monroe?
A number of those. The Children's Village Putnam is walking distance from Monroe. It is up the hill. Some of it is just knowledge. United Way has a campaign where they're handing out what should I do before school. You know, when we make home visits, we'll notice that there are several 3-4-year-olds. Are they in preschool? Would you like help? So it really is just a grassroots campaign to, you know, knocking on doors, handing out flyers, reminding, those sorts of things. So kind of changing, this is important. This is important. The number that does stick out to people is that, you know, 5 years old, go to kindergarten. So that's the way our families operate. Not all, but many of our families operate that way. Now it's time to go to kindergarten. And when they come that way, I mean, I think about my own kids. You know, when they went to kindergarten, I made their plates for them. So they go to kindergarten, then they're asked to carry a tray.
Yeah.
And you've seen it. It's devastating. Like, I don't know how to carry a tray. My mom makes my meals for me, kind of thing. So just that one issue alone for our kindergartners, Kinderjump kids go down and they get to practice. So.
Well, I want to thank you again. I want to thank your staff at Monroe for all the initiatives that you're doing down there with these poverty issues, and also all those organizations that you talked about and the volunteers, because that doesn't just happen. I know there's a lot of work on your part and your staff's part to make that happen. So thanks, appreciate for what you're doing.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Director Dickman.
The language gap that you're referring to, is that like a vocabulary that they're, okay, I wasn't sure if you were referring to, well, the ESL population too. I guess can you talk a little more about that and why, I mean, I guess I kind of know the root causes behind why their vocabulary might not be as wide as it needs to be, but what we're doing and how we're catching them up.
Sure. Schools are built to make, and this is one of the key components of the Green Book that you notice. Schools were built traditionally to make 1 year's worth of growth. And when students come into kindergarten 2 to 3 years behind, that's typically where they are, without a good intervention system in place. The language gap that I'm referring to is vocabulary, experiences, you know, going places, being taken places, but also language is developed through conversation, and students in poverty are often talked at in an authoritative way. No, stop, no, not those kind of things, directions. Whereas a conversation between someone is truly where the language is developed, and conversations with other people, and so students of poverty oftentimes come in with way less language experience and vocabulary experience, knowing vocabulary words. And to close that gap, the first step is phonemic awareness, hearing and production of sounds. And before you can put a symbol to a sound, you have to have that foundation. So what we do in our kindergarten and first grade, and if you need it in older grades, we'll intensely give that to you, is do lots of back and forth, repeating, choral reading, those kinds of things I'm sure you guys have seen when you've done your school visits. And then from there, we systematically teach how to attach a symbol, and that these symbols together make this sound, and this makes a word, and these words make a sentence. And so what our big district initiative, letters, 95% group. Letters is the driver, and 95% group is the car, kind of, so to speak. And so our teachers have this foundation, this knowledge that this is what we need to do to close the gap. And so the end point, Dr. Tate did this in our last principals meeting, is to comprehend. That's our end goal, and sometimes we lose sight of that. But what we're doing in our early grades is starting all the way down with phonemic awareness, hearing and production of sounds, and then moving right into attaching a symbol, and then these make this, words, and that. So that's how we're going about closing that gap. Intensive intervention times and celebrating students for their gains all along the way.
I'm very glad to hear that. I was thinking as you were presenting that I was really proud to be part of this district, and you talked about the relationships, and Director Komodi, you clearly have relationships with the family, but also with the community, and bringing in all of those people, and that's clearly so important. So practicing that relationship skill has obviously paid off for the district and for you. You mentioned the walk zones, and I hope that's something that we can maybe look at. I know that requires money, but I do know that especially in winter, that's an area that hits poverty really hard, because they don't, their moms or dads can't take them, or grandparents, they might not have cars, or they might have one or two jobs that they have to get to. So I've been thinking about that since we did the expanded walk zones, and I'm a little uncomfortable with it still, so I would like to maybe re-examine that. And then just the last thing you mentioned about the kinder jump, and the students, and that's the books you've read, I'm sure, talked about this too. A lot of those are on my reading list. That it's what students are missing when they're not at school. That when they're at school, they're getting all the same things that students who don't experience poverty are getting. It's what they're missing out on and what they're losing while they're away from school. And so I'm so glad that you have these relationships and these programs, and that we're finding out about them. I definitely didn't know about all of them.
Anything else? Director DeFau.
I just would like to share that I'm very pleased and excited to have heard the presentation. Just a short time ago, the board had asked that we would have some opportunities to hear about initiatives in our schools that were directly related to our priorities. So whether it's coincidence or it was planned, thank you very much. We have conversations about educating the whole child, and you're really obviously clearly living that at Monroe in terms of, what do we need to do to impact the environments that this child is experiencing in order for them to be successful. I'd like, not tonight, but I'd like at some point for you to think about, and I'm sure you already have, how could this be replicated in other buildings? Because I'm sure you didn't initiate all of these systems overnight, and that there was an approach to it. So, not just what was done, but how could it even be done better in other buildings? Because I do think you're on the right path. So thank you.
Anything else? All right, thank you very much, TJ.
you.
Nice presentation. Move on, Superintendent Tate, to the presentation of the Putnam Science Center collaboration.
We all understand how important community collaboration is, and one of the groups we collaborate with is the Putnam Museum, and ask them to come forward and talk a little bit about how we're working together. So, Kim, thank you for being here. We appreciate it, and I'll let you introduce the folks that are with you. Kim Finley, CEO and President, or Frank, you going to
Actually,
start?
I'm going to introduce Kim.
All right, now you go.
So I'm Frank Clark. I'm the Vice Chairman of the Board of Trustees. I'm actually standing in for Stephen Balls, who's our Chairman of the Board, President of Augustana. He happens to be out of town. So I'd like to introduce Kim Finley, our President and CEO, and also with us is Nicole Miles. She's our Education and Exhibits Officer. And I'll just take a few minutes and then pass this off. Julie's up here too. I think you know Julie.
They do.
She's one of yours. And I just met her, so I'd be terrible at introducing her. So, well, first of all, we thank you so much for letting us come before you and share a bit of what the Putnam's all about. And I guess relationship's a great word, because that's really what we want to talk about. We've had just a wonderful and long history of a great relationship between the Putnam and the Davenport School District. And we think it's been mutually beneficial. We hope it has. We've had great experiences with children, whether they're in the classroom, at the Putnam itself, or in an after-school program. And even though we really have great respect for that history, we want to let you know that we're all about the children today in the Putnam. And as we look at our Putnam's Board of Trustees and our strategic planning, we're really speaking to those precious wards that we all share, and that is our children going forward. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Kim and let you hear a bit about what we're headed for at the Putnam.
Thank you, Frank. Hello, everyone. Are you going to turn? I think you're going to turn. I was told you would turn. All right. So, first of all, when you think of the term field trip, this is an actual photo from the 1890s of a Putnam field trip, and it doesn't take too much imagination to see how it got the name. They're actually out in the field. I found it fascinating that they all seemed to be girls. I'm told in the 1890s the only way that girls were legitimately supposed to be involved in science was collecting herbarium. So perhaps that's what they're doing. Now, a little bit closer to the current day, we are very accustomed to seeing tremendous numbers of beautiful yellow school buses out in front of the Putnam. When it comes to the Davenport schools and the district in Davenport, we see last year about 860 students at the museum and in school. What did I say? Excuse me, 1,860 from 14 different schools. I'd also like to let you know that every student who's on free and reduced lunch program receives a 50% subsidy, so that the school is subsidized 50% by Putnam funds. The admission fee for a student is $3 if they're coming with their school. That means that it becomes $1.50. I think to put that in perspective, you would need to know that our cost per visitor is $24, and that the Putnam is not a city-funded entity. It is a privately funded entity. So our subsidy program is one that we have been working to grow so that all children at all economic levels can have these important experiences with the Putnam. So as Frank talked about, we have a long history. However, our goal in today's environment is to utilize this iconic asset that is the Putnam, dating back to 1867. So she's a grand old gal. Our question to ourselves is kind of always, so what? If we're not utilizing that facility and the resources within that facility to the highest possible purpose for our students and families and visitors today, we're dishonoring the 6 generations who have kept that icon alive in this community through the Great Depression, through world wars, through recession. There's a reason that it still exists. But that reason is transforming right before our eyes as we're working hard to be a true partner in what our children need from us. Most recently, and the video was playing as you were preparing before the board meeting officially opened, we have transformed a third of the Putnam into a hands-on science center with more than 40 interactive stations for young people to learn by doing. Why did we do that? Well, in part because our community needed a science center, and this was a very cost-effective way to have one. In part because we know that 85% of people of all ages learn best by having hands-on experience. A quick bit of what the students experience will be shown to you in some slides coming up, and if we have time later, perhaps we can send you or you can watch the video that shows it better. But the video is 2 minutes long, and so we didn't want to show the whole thing in the middle of the presentation. When we were raising money for the center, I think it's important to note that I've been fundraising since 1990, both at United Way and at the Putnam. These are the easiest funds I have ever raised, was to create this center. And it came from all types of sources. We had tremendous 6-figure investments from our local corporate entities such as Alcoa and Deere, Modern Woodman, 3M, and then also investments of interactives. We have unique, one-of-a-kind interactives because Genesis Systems Group, who makes and sells robots around the world and is in Mount Joy, built a robotic interactive for the center. Cobham, who's right down the street, used to be Carlton, and before that Lytton and originally Bendix, they built an interactive for the center. The value on these is $50,000 to $75,000 each. So in addition to corporations, we had the city, we had county funds, and those drew down more than $300,000 of state funds. The RDA, the SCRA, the Hubble Waterman Foundation, the Bechtel Trust, individuals. We did is it called Razoo? Yes. We did some online fundraising with Razoo. Everybody from $5 contribution up to $350,000 contribution to a $2.2 million center that took less than 2 years from basic concept to actually having students in there. We pushed to get it done 2 months early so that students could enjoy it this spring. I'd like for, I want to tell you a minute. These are 3 students that depict, I think, the wide variety of young people who take advantage of the Putnam. Up in the top right-hand corner is Xander. Xander is pretty far along on the autism spectrum, and his mother tells us that the Putnam is his happy place. She's taken him to places before and gets a call during the middle of the day to come and get him because it's too disruptive for him to be a part of the activities. But when she brought him to the Putnam, he made it through his first day all day, and then he came back to 4 week-long camps this summer to participate at the Putnam. In the bottom is Carly. This is Carly when she was probably about 10. She's holding a first Lego League robot. When she first came to engineering camp for kids, she cried on the way there and later told her mother that she thought it meant she was going to have to work on cars. This is a very high academic achieving student. Her little pink thing on her shirt says engineer like a girl. Carly's gone on to win state mousetrap car championships with her partner and present to all the junior highs in her school district principals about how wonderfully girls can do with STEM. So she was very shy and has become glowing. In the top left is a group of girls who also were there on Engineering Kids Camp Week. There was one young lady, Kira, who came on subsidy because we subsidize all of our programs. And she was the last student left out of 300 that afternoon. And Nicole, in fact, went down to the grand lobby and found her sitting there with a teacher and said, what's happening is, her grandmother had dropped her off but didn't have enough gas in the car to come and pick her up. The really fascinating thing is that that day they were to reverse engineer a little walking wind-up robot. Means take it apart. When Nicole encountered the little girls, Kira's was walking across the table. And she said, "Oh, you didn't take yours apart." "Yes, I did." She was one of only 3 children out of 300 who had the initiative and the ingenuity to be able to put it back together on her own and make it operate again. One of the things that we would so dearly love to be able to do is have a little bit better contact with our teachers so that when these young people in our summer programs are excelling, we could let the teachers know that the classes they're going into, how well they're doing, and to really challenge them, because regardless of their socioeconomic situation, they're brilliant. These are some photos of the Science Center and the 145 interactives. It's 1001 gears in the top right-hand corner. I love this little girl totally absorbed in electric circuits. Brother and sister at the cones. And our belief that imagination is the heart of all innovation. Now I would like to... Nick, is it you? Okay.
Thanks so much for making the time for us tonight. My name is Nicole Miles. I'm the Chief Education and Experience Officer, as Mr. Clark introduced me. I've had the pleasure to be at the Putnam for just about 5 years, and I just want to go over a little bit about the kind of programming that we're doing in education in pre-K through 12. A couple of years ago, we did expand into the pre-K arena. That had to do with the need for STEM in preschools and getting our very youngest students excited and engaged and really prepared to have that curiosity factor ignited for them, and how well that worked using the informal learning techniques that we use at the Putnam. We have programs that operate during the school day. Students who are coming not only for field trips but also for specific programs, things like studying Egypt in the 5th and 6th grades, they'll come for that, or for having a Science Alive program as part of their Science Center experience, and that's with an educator one-on-one with a group of students, working with them. Also new this year, we'll have some classes within our Fab Lab, and you'll be hearing about that in a few slides later during the school day. We also do some after-school programming both throughout the community and out-of-school time programming, which is really, really important. We know that those, 95% of our lives we're spending outside of school, and so our goal with outside-of-school time programming really is about supporting what can happen in the classroom so that students go back, and as Kim mentioned, irrespective of from where they've come socioeconomically, or whether English is their first language, or whether they have a disability, or whether they are gifted and talented, but that they go back into that classroom prepped and ready for the next challenge, whether it's that their curiosity is ignited or whether that they've learned that they have a new skill, whether they're eager to learn. Our goal with these programs always is to be foundational to the classroom. Therefore, every program that we offer is tied back to the Iowa Common Core, and we've also started working with the Next Generation Science Standards to make sure that we are aligned with what's happening in the classroom. We do offer in-museum out-of-school programs, both our Explorers Junior and Explorers programs. We offer Friday night programs for Scouts, Girl Scouts, and Cub Scouts. We do summer camps that can come in an array of done-in-a-day programs for our middle school students, half-day programs for our youngest campers, and week-long full-day programs for those in the middle. We also do a program called Week of Wonders. This is a family experience. So during break times, we do actually plan those around the Davenport School schedule, as you are our home community. We see about 110 different school districts, but we prefer to work off of the schedule of the Davenport schools. And so Week of Wonders happens during the holiday breaks, both in the spring and the winter. And this is a time when educators are actually out on the floor every day, has a theme, and they're working with families to experience a variety of different topics. Last spring we did something with CSI, so it was all forensic sciences that you could come in and experience at the Putnam, or it could be something with dry ice during the winter and the different types of ice. But these are activities and opportunities also to provide some support to the families. So how do you have these conversations? I know that's something that's going on a lot with Common Core now in general, is what do these concepts mean? And this is a really friendly environment in which to encounter things like project-based learning and core concepts. So that's a little bit about what's happening with our programs. I mentioned a little bit about our informal education approach. We have some core values in education that has to do with our belief that every child has the potential to make a lasting contribution, that they can make discoveries, and that they have the right to be inspired, that so much is lost when a student just doesn't know what's out there. You take some of the students that were in those slides before, how different things might be, their outlook might be, had they not had the opportunity to even know. And I would say that transcends to families as well. You don't know what's out there until you encounter it. We do promote a do to discover model, this notion that we try to give no more than 20% of an encounter with the student is given in instruction, direct listening instructions that they discover as they go and we talk them through. That's part of that hands-on experience that we're very devoted to. We believe, as is the common practice for teachers now, that we're guides to learning and not sages of learning. We don't lecture, we don't talk at students, we help them unpack these answers themselves. We also want to make sure, and this is something new in the last few years, that every time we have an experience like this, that we're connecting it back to a real life career in the programming. So what is the potential for the forensic sciences? What is the potential for nanosciences? What is the potential for an Egyptologist? What do etymologists do? All of these ideas that there are careers all the way from the technical level through very advanced levels for all students, and that when they're interested in one of these topics, whether they're interested in how do the gears, how does that 1,001 gear turn so slowly but make the propeller turn so fast, that there are many ways in which you can apply that to your real life and be excited and happy and productive in a career. We also want to make sure that leaving the Putnam and having that experience doesn't end the experience. So that's a beginning point. We see ourselves as a jumping off point for programs, or a tipping point program. We want to provide enough instruction to get the student excited and ready to go, and then to leave hoping to find out more. And that's part of that preparation of getting back into the classroom and being eager to learn, and why we enjoy being a partner on field trips and field trip experiences for students, that we can actually provide a foundation the teacher can then go back and capture that excitement with. We, this last year, entered into a grant called the C2 grant with the Hubbell Waterman Foundation. We are fortunate to have the Hubbell Waterman Foundation be supporters of the Putnam Museum and Science Center in a number of ways. But this year, we really wanted to focus on a large portion of the grant being working with the Davenport schools and some beta testing. So we built a Fab Lab / tile classroom, which actually later became known as an active learning classroom. Several of you may have visited the one you have. You have an active learning classroom at Davenport West High School, and it's not by accident that we have that. We partnered together to make sure that we also had an active learning foundation so that we could work with the district. Our grant provided a large number of funds to build our Fab Lab and tile classroom, as well as some leveled readers. This is a new project that we're involved in this year. We'd like to see leveled readers in the museum so that when students are coming into the museum, they can get a reader that is actually at their level. If you've been to any museum, you know that sometimes the text panels can be well above the reading level of even a skilled adult. So we wanted to boil these down into something that was engaging, but also at the reading level of the student. And so we're working currently with 4 levels of reading, and we'll be expanding that. We have materials for 6th graders. We were really fortunate this summer to have all of the 6th grade science teachers from your district join us, and they worked in the Science Center developing materials for a visit. And they are all coming. Most of them are already through their field trip for 6th grade this year. They've come with their science classes and actually been able to utilize those materials on site. From there, we have developed, after listening to their feedback, pre- and post-visit materials, so materials for the teachers to use in their classrooms, as well as some family support materials. That idea of relationships that TJ mentioned as well is so important to us, that we want the families to know what's happening. And if a student is really excited about a concept or an idea, being able to not only go back to the classroom and get some positive feedback, but being able to go home and get positive feedback is also really important. So we want to provide some materials for that. That's ongoing. We're working with smartboard applications. We know that technology is changing all the time, and so the days of the pre- and post-visit materials being something that a teacher might have in a binder is not nearly as convenient as having a smartboard application, nor is it as engaging for the student, so we're working with this. And we have some high school Fab Lab participation work coming in the next year. Part of this grant was to partner with the Davenport West High School program and have their students come down and work in our Fab Lab. When we get to what a Fab Lab is, we'll explain why that's such an exciting endeavor. This is not a picture of our Fab Lab classroom. I don't know how familiar you are with the Fab Lab, but a Fab Lab was started by MIT about 15 years ago. There's now over 100 throughout the world, a few in informal education spaces like the Putnam Museum. Fab Labs are all about prototyping. They're all about taking your idea and actually making it real, and the materials that you would need to do this. So in our Fab Lab classroom, we have 4 3D printers. One is portable and 3 are stationary, as well as a digital scanner. We now have 2 CNC machines. One is small to make smaller pieces. One is quite large. We have a laser cutter. We have a vinyl cutter. We have 4 smart boards that allow students to work on their ideas individually in pods, part of that active learning model, or to actually link them all up and show one student's project across all 4. We have some VEX robotics. This is not a component typically of a Fab Lab, but it is another way for us to encourage active learning with students. Many students participate in the first LEGO League and work with NXT robots, but VEX robotics is slightly different, and we wanted to put something new into the area for students to encounter. We're also working with Chromebooks for coding. When we teach coding, we use open source materials such as Scratch. This is a website you can look up yourselves to learn how to code. Open source is really, really important. It's a foundation of Fab Labs, and it's important because it allows your students to go home without having to pay for anything or purchase anything. If they have internet in their house or internet at their schools, they can get these programs and actually be able to work with them. We have assorted small prototyping tools, things that will allow you to make wax models, soldering irons, drills, etc., all of which we've learned to use ourselves and now teach students, and in the future we'll be teaching teachers to be able to work with. We have a program with Little Bits. Little Bits are accessible circuitry. And I would encourage you to pay us a visit to really learn a little bit more about some of those things. The Fab Lab IP address is really exciting and a really special part of the Fab Lab. All Fab Labs that are part of the Fab Ed organization are actually interconnected, and we are part of that. Therefore, you can sign on in our Fab Lab, and you can see what's happening in the Fab Lab in Israel, or the Fab Lab in Amsterdam, or the Fab Lab at the high school in Minnesota, and you can connect and you can actually talk. What's exciting about that is because all Fab Labs are built with the same backbone of materials. What I'm doing in the Putnam Fab Lab can be done in the Israel Fab Lab, and what they're doing can be done here. So these this interconnection is really, really exciting for students. It really opens up the world for possibilities. We're problem solving. Things like floods and electrical outages are being solved in Fab Labs by groups of youth who are getting together and talking to each other about these things. So it's a really exciting, has a lot of potential. I'm going to invite Julie up to the microphone to talk about some of the current partnerships we've had with the district.
I'm very excited about the partnership that we've developed with the Putnam. We have a really good reason for enjoying that partnership because they're always willing to help. When we sit down at the table and talk about programming, it's what can we do, how can we make it better, what are the other sources of financial help that we can provide. So they're problem solvers, and they're always trying to meet the needs of our students. I want to point out that if you have not been to the Putnam lately, it's time to go, because it's not the Putnam that you remember from before. I recently had my 2-year-old grandson there and could literally not get him out of the facility. There's just so many engaging activities for children. But our partnership with the Putnam goes well beyond this list, but it is a place to point out some of our relationships that we have, because they are truly a resource for our community that goes well beyond their 4 walls. They reach out and provide services to our district. And so here's a few of the things that we're involved with them. They are very instrumental in our first LEGO League in offering partnerships, in planning and hosting the event. They are on a variety of our advisory councils. They allow Children's Village West to come in there anytime for free to their facility to enjoy the various exhibits that they have available. They serve on as partners on the Governor's STEM Advisory, and as Nicole alluded to, we're instrumental in the design of our STEM classroom at Davenport West, and it's mirrored at the Putnam. The biggest achievement that I think that we have come across in the last few years is our Great Minds 6th grade experience, where every 6th grader in our district goes to Putnam and enjoys that opportunity in the science classroom and gets to experience all of those. How many exhibits are in that?
There are 42 hands-on exhibits.
42 hands-on exhibits. So it's a great partnership that we have with the Putnam, and we really do take a great deal of advantage of this opportunity.
Dave Johnston, who's a manufacturing manager at Alcoa, had planned to be with us this evening and has gone missing. I'm a bit concerned about him at this point. But he is a relatively new trustee to the Putnam. And one of the things that Dave would express to you, as would most of the investors from the corporate side in the Science Center, is their significant need for STEM literacy coming into the workplace, both today, as you see the growth from 2000 to 2008 in non-STEM careers versus STEM, and then the predicted growth from 2008 to 2018. And Nicole alluded to this, but Cobham is a wonderful example of a workplace that says we would love to have students who have one-year certificates or associate's degrees. We have wonderful jobs, careers for them. Cobham also literally has PhDs in rocket science working here in the area at their facility. I think one of the things that we're trying to do is help young people to realize that there are still great careers and jobs out there that could be welding related. They could take a year or two certificate. A little side benefit has been a lot of the parents of our young people have picked up the career materials that we provide in the Science Center because they're finding out that there are also better careers out there for them. And this relates a little bit to what our principal was talking about earlier in terms of being a resource to help people to move to the level that they would like to have in their family for their children. So what's next? This visit to you as a board started with a visit that Dr. Tate made to us to talk with our board chairman, Stephen Balls, and Nicole and I, not about what we had to offer, which is what we spent the last many minutes doing, but more about how we can be the best preferred partner for the district that we can possibly be. And it's not really so much to benefit the Putnam, nor even to benefit the district, but it is absolutely about benefiting the young people who we all care so much about becoming aware of their talents and their skills, gaining confidence, and going on to have a successful life. So some of the things we spoke about were Creative Arts Academy and how the Putnam could become a part of what's happening there through the Fab Lab, professional development exchange, ways that we can help. We always want to be a great partner to our classroom teachers. We spoke about the possibility of writing for some additional grants together. We have some exciting ideas that I think we could even draw national attention and national grants. Sustainability of these yearly 6th grade visits, and then starting to discuss other grades that would have experience at that grade level throughout the district, and all the possibilities that the Fab Lab presents. We haven't maximized any of these yet. They're out there in front of us. So we would love to hear any questions or comments at this time from the board. Thank you, Dr. Tate and school board members.
Any comments or questions? Director Dickman.
Guess I'll start us off here. I guess my first reaction is, wow, this is so cool. I am a regular visitor to Putnam. My daughter's a little bit young to take full advantage of all of the programs, but I think it's really exciting. So when you mentioned there about expanding it, I think, older grades, younger grades, that sounds wonderful to me. I was looking at the picture when you put the slide up and that smile that the little girl has. I think that's representative of how important what you're doing is. That's what makes kids excited. When they go on field trips and they get to discover and they get to learn that way, that's what's going to make them push through when they're having a hard reading problem or a hard math problem. It's what's going to make them say, hey, I want to do this. I am glad to hear that you're aligning with the next generation science standards. I had a teacher friend tell me about those lately, and I'm excited about them. I didn't really have any questions. I just wanted to.
Thank you so much. We've made leaps and bounds since Nicole has joined the Putnam, in no small part because Nicole was a classroom teacher. And so she understands very well the challenges, the opportunities, the structure, and how to best partner with the classroom.
Anybody else? Director Crumwoody.
I too want to say, wow, this is just great. All the things that you're doing and the partnership that you have with us in the Davenport schools. And one of my questions has to do with what you just finished up with. Sustainability was one of your conversations with Dr. Tate, and directly related to the 6th grade program. Can you talk a little bit about that? Right now, it's funded through a grant. Is that correct?
Correct. It's a partnership between Great Minds and the Putnam through the Hubbell Waterman Foundation grant and through actually our entire Science Center fundraising. We were able to set aside funds with each of our funders to make sure that students had access. So between Great Minds and that program, we were able to put together the funds to pay for the admission as well as the transportation for all of the students.
Great.
So there is a sustainability challenge for that we will be taking on in short order to sit down with the foundation and figure out how we together can go forward and make sure that those continue to happen. As we spoke when we met, we believe it will take 6 years to really find out if what we're doing is making a remarkable difference, because that's how long it's going to take to get this very first group up through high school, and we will start to see some differences. And we want to continue that and make sure that we are able to refine and perfect that program.
The corporate partners that we work with and receive sponsorships from, we have been very conscientious about asking to reserve a portion of each sponsorship, whether it's for an exhibit or a film or a program, to provide subsidy. And I think it would be fair to say that over the last 5 years, approximately, the Putnam has really transformed from a museum that everybody thinks they remember with the mummies and their 5th grade school trip. And you tend to use the word museum, and you get sort of a connotation of dusty, musty, old, dark, dank, into a very dynamic organization. And I believe that most of our corporate partners and most of our foundation partners, such as the Bechtel Trust and the Hubbell Waterman Foundation, are very excited. They're actually putting larger dollar amounts into their support for the Putnam.
Good.
Again, as a non-municipally supported organization, a not-for-profit, it's always a challenge for us, but this is central to our strategy and the Putnam's mission going forward. As I said, if we're not using that resource for the highest purpose today, I don't know why people would continue to invest. But we are doing that, and in partnership with the district, and really being able to show that we're listening and that we're acting upon what we're being told, then we can show results. And that's what brings investment from donors, funders, individuals in our community.
Okay.
It's not easy,
No.
but it's working.
Well, I certainly want to thank you for this partnership, and I was really waiting to hear about the preschool, because one of the conversations that we had when we decided on the site was the availability of the Putnam for those preschool children. So thank you for that also.
I have some lovely pictures of them going back to class and dressing as little Egyptian mummies and sending us their photographs. It is open to them whenever they'd like to come over. And I think there's so much more that in relationship conversation we learn about in listening to the principal of Monroe begin this session. I just gave him my business card and said we'd love to provide passes to the 180 zone so that families can also come up the hill and participate at the Putnam. With the Science Center open now, we are seeing many more fathers at the museum, both as part of the family unit and I believe as non-custodial fathers who are finding this a wonderful thing to do with their children on the weekends.
Well, that's wonderful to hear, because those are the kinds of conversations, we want to have more of those conversations, and the Poverty Committee that I referred to earlier this evening, those are the conversations we're beginning to have, and how do we go about finding those partners in our community to have those conversations with, so we can partner together to meet the needs of all of our families in Davenport schools.
Exactly.
So thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bennett?
What are your guys' volunteer status nowadays?
Never as good as we would like. Are you volunteering?
Maybe, because I know a bunch of high schoolers who would love the opportunity to come help out.
And we would love to have you. And in fact, Pleasant Valley, I happen to know, this I'll lay down the challenge for you. Pleasant Valley, volunteering is part of their graduation program. Is it part of yours? I'm ignorant of that fact.
Not that I know of.
Okay. Well, I like that it doesn't have to be mandated anyway, right? You're still interested. And so for this, the classes in the engineering camp for kids runs all age levels from pre-K up through junior high. And any young people like yourselves who could come and assist our educators. Right? We see 165,000 people a year, and we have just 2 full-time and 2 part-time educators. So we can use all the extra help. And the neat thing about volunteering at the Putnam is it's also a lot of fun.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Bennett, you can email us if you'd like
Okay.
at education@putnam.org
Got that.
and let us know you'd like to volunteer, and we'll take you through the process. We start that at age 14.
Okay.
So, and we're looking for volunteers for our floor. We're looking for volunteers for our Fab Lab. We're starting some training in that space for people to be able to work in it. So volunteering is something that starts at age 14 and goes all the way up through adults and retirees. So we'd love to have you.
Thank you.
Nice question, Bennett. Is there any other discussion or questions? Director Cool?
Well, I'd just like to speak up on behalf of the Dusty Musty the Mummies. They were around in my day, and I presume they're still there and will be for some time
they're
to
there.
come. And I realize we've moved into the 21st century, and I'm wondering how many of our student school board members have attended Putnam as part of a school activity. What grades?
Like elementary school.
Elementary. Basically, don't think I've been there since. For school.
I think I did once or twice in elementary school, and then I did first Lego League, and then a few years later I volunteered as a worker for the first Lego League.
Great. Well, what a wonderful opportunity, and I think, you know, part of your job is trying to get the news out. I know the Figge has that issue as an art museum, getting the word out about what's there, and it's not, the Figge is no longer a musty, dusty place anymore either. It's live and active. Ever since we started our Children's Village West School there, and we looked at the facility to say, does this work for us or not? We looked at the association with the museum and said, this is just a wonderful place on the hill for us to be. And I think it continues to be. And I think that, you know, although she may be the grand old dame, the grand old girl, she certainly had some surgery. It's a fantastic looking building, has kept its age, and it's in a wonderful place. And I think that part of that aesthetic is what our children respond to as well. Sometimes I think we take that for granted, that it's all about the classrooms and instruction, but I think children are not immune to the aesthetic of their environments, and the aesthetic that you help provide there at the Putnam is certainly enhances their lives. So I just, following up on Principal Schneckloth's presentation about Monroe, as I see him and the efforts he's making to try to bring partners in, collaborations, things that we couldn't do on our own, you're doing the same thing. You're bringing people in because you can't do it without doing that. And so I hope that anybody that's out there in the legislative arena understands what we're doing, or the city council, to see what's going on with trying to leverage resources locally rather than asking for funding. But certainly these are opportunities that deserve public funding, because I really think that there's hope that if organizations like our schools and the Putnam Museum and the Figge can pull together and pull in our children, we can make a difference in this world. So your presentation makes me very hopeful. Thank you.
Thank you, Rich. When you think about the fact that we draw school districts from as far away as Wisconsin to participate in the Putnam, we do have a treasure here, and we do feel a responsibility as an anchor on the west side of our community, and being one of the last remaining large entities on the west side, there's an aspect of economic development and neighborhoodness, it's not a word, but it becomes very important in
That's one of the
role
reasons that we were
play.
happy to join with you out there to help support that cause.
Yeah, appreciate that.
I just got to say, one of the best presentations I've seen out there, I think, was that toxic environment for girls, the advertising thing that goes on, and I thought that was very good.
Misrepresentation.
Yeah, very, very educational, very helpful, real 21st century stuff. And the other thing that was so cool was like the T-Rex that you had out front that actually moved when you went up by it. I don't know if did you see that?
39-foot animatronic T-Rex outside, yes.
That was
Motion
so
sensor
cool.
activated, yes.
Scary.
Yeah, well, for some. Delightful for others. Well, I'll leave with this thought. Carmen Darland, the director of Quad City Arts, shared with me the other day she was walking with a neighbor. And the neighbor said, Carmen, have you been over to see that new part of the Putnam? That's totally different. Carmen said, I know a little bit about that. So my 11-year-old grandson was visiting here over the summer, and I couldn't get him to leave. We went for an hour. We stayed for 5. But as we were going out the door at 5 o'clock when they closed, he looked up at me and he said, Grandma, I sure wish they had something this cool in Chicago.
Very good.
Anything else? All right. Well, thank you, Frank, Kim, Nicole, and Julie. That was an exciting, a great presentation. All right, we'll move on to communications. Director Crumwoody, would you please read those for us?
Thank you, Mr. President. Yes, October 21st is the ILSIAC, the Local School Advisory Committee meeting here at 5:30 in the Jim Hester Boardroom. October the 27th at 6, regular school board meeting here at the Jim Hester Boardroom. October the 28th, 6:30 to 8:30, student showcase, River City Music Experience in Davenport. On October the 29th, we have from 6 to 7:30 our legislative forum at Madison Elementary School. And Director Kluhl, why is that so important to announce?
I'm happy you asked, Director Crumwoody. We're pretty excited that this is following up on the legislative ice cream social that we did just last week, and Mitchell was there, and was it Emily was there with you? Olivia was there too. We had a great time with legislators on an informal basis, but what's coming up on the 29th is an opportunity for people to be educated on what the candidates are about and where they stand on education. Mark Rodolfi, Quad City Times editorial page editor, is going to moderate that forum for us. It's going to be at Madison School from 6 to 7:30 on the 29th of October. So right now we've got Representative Thede, Representative Wood, Representative candidate Ross, and Senate candidate Maria Bribriesco signed up to attend. We're hoping that the other two candidates will sign up as well. So come on out. It's not an ice cream social. You missed that. Sorry, you have to wait till next year. But come on out and be educated. That's what we're about.
Thank you, Director Clow.
Thank you.
November 3rd, 5:30, Committee of the Whole, ASC, Jim Hester Boardroom. November 4th, 3 o'clock, our Legislative Advocacy Committee, ASC, Executive Boardroom. November the 5th, 4 p.m., Policy Committee, ASC, Executive Boardroom. November the 10th, 6 p.m., Regular School Board Meeting, ASC, Jim Hester Boardroom. And November the 24th, 6 p.m., Regular Meeting, ASC, Jim Hester Boardroom.
Thank you, Director Crumwitty. Next is open forum. Open forum is a time for members of the community to give input at a board meeting regarding school district issues or concerns. Individuals who want to speak should fill out an open forum request and give it to the board secretary prior to open forum. The board will not act on any issue presented during open forum if it was not published as an agenda item. The Iowa Open Meetings Law prohibits action on any issue that is not on the agenda. The president will set the amount of time allowed for individuals to speak during open forum. The board asks that no charges or complaints be made against individual employees of the district or community during open forum. Remarks that reflect negatively on the character or motives of any person will be called out of order. We have 5 open forum requests this evening. Each of you will have 2 minutes. When you come up to the microphone, please give your name and address. And we'll go in this order: Hunter Bell, Jay Swords, Brett Menard, Anthony DeSalvo, Peyton Young. Hunter?
Hello. My name is Hunter Bell. I'm a student at North High School, and I'm here to talk about keeping the 4-block schedule, and currently I'm in the dual grad program.
Hunter, I need your address too.
1691 West 49th Street.
Okay, thank you.
We have all experienced the 7th period in a day schedule. Everything we did in class seemed to move rapidly. It felt like we were rushing to complete all the assignments and such for that day. The classes lasted approximately 45 minutes and had a time layout similar to this. About 5 minutes of attendance and preparing for class, 10 minutes of review of the previous day's lessons, 20 minutes of being taught the new material, 5 to 10 minutes of explaining the homework, followed by the answering of any questions, and with the few remaining minutes, we would pack up. As it is now in our 4-block schedule at North, we have time to learn the lessons, ask questions, giving teachers more time to explain things, and to do some work in class if time permits. What I've observed is that I am able to learn and retain the information longer when given more time to work with it as I learn it in class. And just a question, what else would you be considering to take out?
We can't answer any questions during open forum.
Okay, thank you. In essence, a lot of this boils down to just time. Twice as more passing time. There will be twice as much passing time with a 7-block or with a 7-period day than a 4-block schedule. This leads to less time in class. And for those who are frequent troublemakers, I guess, if you want to call them, that could lead to them having more time to get in trouble. Okay.
That's 2 minutes. Do you have a final statement?
Thank you for listening.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Hunter. Next is Jay Swords.
My name is Jay Swords. I live at 1620 22nd Street, Rock Island. There's an old saying, you get what you pay for. In education, this might be translated as, you teach who you've identified for. The proposed new identification system for TAG elementary students suffers from just this flaw. By using only high-stakes standardized testing criteria, only those students who are good test takers and whose gifts fall in the areas of academic core abilities will be served. This, in spite of the fact that creative thinking, leadership, and visual and performing arts abilities are all listed as part of the TAG mission. These abilities require qualitative identification. Interviews, classroom observation, teacher, parent, and even student nominations, portfolios, and a host of other soft identification methods. Even within the core disciplines, reliance on standardized testing leaves out many gifted and qualified students who don't show their abilities well in this single way. Dr. Susan Johnson, author of Identifying Gifted Students, writes, "Using a standardized test as a gatekeeper for entrance into a gifted program will almost always guarantee the underrepresentation of economically disadvantaged students in the TAG program. Leaving these students out of TAG for such an arbitrary reason goes against both best practices in the field and an intuitive sense of fairness. I urge the board to deny this proposal and request the superintendent to suspend its implementation." Thank you.
Thank you, Jay. Next is Brett Menard. Okay, thank you.
Brett Menard, 420 Walnut Street, LeClaire, Iowa. I am the TAG facilitator at Sudlow Intermediate, and I would like to correct some misconceptions that I heard from the board when we were talking about elementary TAG identification criteria. Dr. Francois Gagne defines giftedness as the possession and use of untrained and spontaneously expressed abilities, and talent as superior mastery of developed abilities or skills, and in both cases looks at the top 10% of same-age peers when considering who to identify. While the presentation highlighted an ideal identification rate of 3 to 5%, the identification rate for the state of Iowa, as reported from the National Association for Gifted Children, is 9.4%. Within the new criteria, there is no formal allowance made for qualitative data sources. And this means that our gifted underachievers, English language learners, and twice exceptional students will be left out because they do not test well. The NAGC stresses that reliance on performance results alone may overlook certain gifted students. And in relying on standardized tests for our identification criteria, we are eliminating the possibility of identified students who are creatively gifted or gifted in non-academic areas. Additionally, the criteria looks at the SMI and SRI performance of the student, and there is no available data that suggests or validates using either of these items to identify TAG students. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Brett. Next is Anthony DeSalvo.
Hi, I'm Anthony DeSalvo, 3929 West Garfield Street. I'm also here to talk about 4-block scheduling in our high schools, but I'm more focused on teacher relationship with students. I'm focused on the 90 minutes a day we currently get in class to talk with our teachers, ask questions, get good answers, good, well thought out answers to whatever we may be needing to know. If I have a question on the homework in a 7-period a day schedule, I have about 10, 15 minutes to ask those questions with all the other kids in my class wondering all different things. So I have to wait in line, get a quick 10-second answer, then I'm shoved out the door to my next class. Teachers will have twice as many students to deal with in a 7-period schedule versus a 4-block schedule. That's more time to grade papers, so the less response that we get, the less that we know about how we're doing ourselves in our classes. It's less personalization in our schools. I know we say we're a district of distinction, and this is what sets us apart, our teachers and the relationship that we have with our students. I'd like to point out in the data wall over there that our 3 high schools are on average, doing above what our middle schools are, both in terms of growth and in standards alone. That's because we have that 4-block schedule versus that 7-period schedule, that 7-period schedule that our middle schools still have. I'm sorry, gathering my thoughts. Like I said, we get more explanation. We get more in-depth answers to our questions. We get more time to be curious, more time to explore on our own. And with that time left over, we can do what we want. We can study for an upcoming test that's coming next block. We can do our homework for that night. We can... Oh, I'm sorry. I do have one point to finish on. This is a petition that I've started, and we have 299 student signatures so far from both North and West, with 1/4 of the students at North having signed it already. So, just
Okay.
food for thought.
Great, thank you. And if you want, you can submit that either to me or to our secretary.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Last is Peyton Young.
Hi, my name is Peyton Young. I am also here to talk about the 4-block schedule. I live on 2641 North Concord Street. If you guys decide to get rid of the 4-block schedule and go to the 7-block schedule, students from middle school, elementary, so on and so forth, will be missing out on a lot of opportunities as AP classes and electives. How are you going to work those in? There are only 4 years in high school, 4 steps for each foreign language, 45 minutes in an AP class, 40 plus more class hours for AP classes, and block AP classes run 3/4. How would the students make it all the way to AP classes? These 23 cut teachers will be high-level teachers or elective teachers. Not as much time for electives, but electives provide diversity. And also, one class with periods would take all year. So it makes it even more impossible for AP classes, and students would be missing out on the opportunity to learn more instead of just being able to just learn so much. They can go on with their learning in high school, and they can go even farther in college. Thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you, Peyton. And thank you, all of you that stepped up to our microphone today. Your input really is valuable. So Hunter, Jay, Brett, Anthony, and Peyton, thanks a lot for coming up and giving us your thoughts. Move on to the consent agenda. May I have a motion?
Mr. President,
Director Crumity.
I move the consent agenda as presented by the administration.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion? Call for the vote. Director Crumity?
Yes.
Director Dickman?
Yes.
Director DeFow?
Yes.
Director Kluhl?
Yes.
Director Snyder?
Yes.
And my vote is yes. Motion carries. Thank you. I have a motion regarding approval of bills.
Mr. President,
Director Kluhl.
move that the board approve the following resolution as recommended by administration. The resolution is as follows. Resolved that all claims presented to the board, having been duly certified as correct by the secretary, reviewed by the administration and board members, and they are hereby audited and allowed as just claims and warrants drawn in the treasury for the several amounts. Further resolved, the payment of claims and salaries be approved as presented for the period 9/18/14 through 10/8/14 with the following voided check, that being check number 321270, payable to Jennifer Lynn Taranas in the amount of $144.95, and that was a duplicate check.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion? Call for the vote. Director Kluhl?
Yes.
Director Dickman?
Yes.
Director DeFow?
Yes.
Director Crumity?
Yes.
Director Snyder?
Yes.
My vote is yes. Motion carries. Thank you. Superintendent report.
Thank you, Mr. President. Candy Reed is the 2014 Iowa School Counselor of the Year. She is our counselor at Garfield Elementary. That's great news for her, the school, and the district. The district has just been awarded 2 major grants. One is the the United States Department of Education gaining early awareness and readiness for undergraduate programs. We know that as the Gear Up. It's a graduation incentive program that begins in intermediate school and takes a cohort through graduation. We have had that in the past, and so we are being renewed with 12 other districts. Also, there's two major grants. One is Now is the Time Project Iowa grant and the State School Climate Transformation grant. One is about mental health. The other is about behavior management in the district, and these are multi-year and several $1 million a year, and we'll tell you more as we find out more about them. But those great news for the district, and it's wonderful to be recognized that we need the help, and then somebody come through for us. So, Luke, would you start us out on what's happening at the schools, and we'll go down to our student board members.
Yeah. We had our homecoming dance on October 4th, which was a success. A lot of people had a lot of fun. So fall sports are wrapping up. This week we have the MAC cross country meet on Thursday. Our hunger drive is starting up, which it is all over the district. And we had 3 students qualify to be National Merit Scholar semifinalists based on their PSAT scores from Central, which is, I think, the most we've ever had.
I know one thing about our marching band. They're doing well at all the competitions. I think they just got grand champions in Western Illinois this past weekend, I think. And that's about it.
At West, we just kicked off our hunger drive. We had a dodgeball event last week that raised over $400. In addition, we also had a 1-mile fun run organized by students that they are looking to expand in the next coming years. And then we had 2 students featured in a Discovery virtual field trip on National Manufacturing Day, Twin and Tony Wynn, who are students in our Project Lead the Way program. Over 150 students viewed this virtual field trip.
Our blood drive at North was a success, and we had an improvement of 10 more units than last year for a total of 96. Our Masquerade Orchestra concert was successful. I don't know if any of you guys went. But the Band Spectacular is coming up on October 14th, and they're excited to perform their Wizard of Oz halftime show.
Also at North, we're kicking off our hunger drive that will carry out throughout the rest of the month. Things to help get kids excited to donate are different kind of activities that we'll do with them. So we're going to do a Stop the Bop, Penny Wars, and a contest for whoever's second block class gathers the most. They'll get a breakfast, so that will be nice. Also, we recently, last Monday, had MetroFest, and that went very well. There's actually a parent that commented that they wished it would have been longer, which generally you don't get on a long concert like that, but that was pretty nice. And it's always great to bring all the community schools together in a non-competitive way, just to sing together and be together. Also, coming up next Saturday, not this one, but next, October 25th, is all-state auditions, so a lot of students in the district are very excited for that.
Thank you, student board members. Mr. President, that concludes the report for this evening.
All right, thank you very much. We'll move on to other items requiring action. May I have a motion regarding the agreement with AEA to provide driver's ed?
Mr. President?
Director Kluhl.
I move that the board approve administration's recommendation on the agreement with the Mississippi Bend Area Education Agency in the amount of $370 per student. Total amount paid in fiscal 2014 was $117,438.
May I have a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion? Director DeFau.
How does the rate for driver's ed compare as to our last agreement?
Our last agreement was $360, so it's up $10.
Is there any additional discussion? Okay, we'll call for the vote. Director Kluhl.
Yes.
Director DeFau.
Yes.
Director Dickman.
Yes.
Director Crumwoody.
Yes.
Director Snyder.
Yes.
My vote is yes. Motion carries. Thank you. May I have a motion regarding approval of bid for Brady Street Stadium ticket booth?
Mr. President,
Director DeFau.
I move that the board accept the administration's recommendation and approve the lowest responsive bid from Precision Builders for $150,102 for the Brady Street Stadium Ticket Booth ADA Improvement Project.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion? Call for the vote. Director DeFau.
Yes.
Director Snyder.
Yes.
Director Dickman.
Yes.
Director Crumwoody.
Yes.
Director Kluhl.
Yes.
My vote is yes. Motion carries. Thank you. May I have a motion regarding approval of DCHS parking lot and tennis court?
Mr. President,
Director Crumwoody.
I move the administration's recommendation that the board approve the plan to relocate the tennis courts for Central High School to the Brady Stadium campus and construct additional parking on the current tennis court location.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Sure. Superintendent Tate.
Thank you, Mr. President. This is the third or fourth time that we have looked at this item. This is the second time it's come up for vote. We met with administration after we had had several discussion about this, and it was somewhat confused by we were trying to say, where's it going to fit in the construction project itself? Then we were looking at some temporary lots, and it got even more confusing. And what I asked them to do two things. Number one, President Johansson talked about standards. I said, measure the lots right now. Let's see what is the capacity per student and what's the furthest distance someone has to walk. And let's say that's our standard. It's our average right now. And then let's compare so we'll know how Central falls in that at least when we're asking you to approve these parking spaces. So we've done that. And secondly, it's back to, I believe, a recommendation we made when we began this, but it's fairly simplified. We're asking that you approve the construction so that by the time the construction of the auditorium and pool starts, we do have parking for the students. So I want to at least make those comments. I recommend that we do this in all fairness to Central, again, when we look at the standards. But we have the experts here. We do have the principal, and we have the architect here, so certainly ask any technical questions that you have about it.
Thank you. Is there any discussion? Director Dickman.
I would have preferred if the motion was being brought up in two parts. There's the issue of parking, and then there's the issue of moving the tennis courts. I would support having that space converted to parking spaces because I do think that we are underserving the parking needs of Central, but I do not necessarily support moving the tennis courts or building new tennis courts at this time.
Are you, to do something like that, you would have to move to amend the motion.
All right, well, I guess I move to amend the motion language so that I move to separate the votes from building parking where the current tennis courts are and building new tennis courts by the stadium.
And you're moving to amend that so that it would
be in
appear
two
as
votes.
two separate
Correct.
motions. Okay. I'll try to clarify that. Is there a second to the proposed amendment? Okay, the motion fails. Is there any additional discussion on the main motion, which is the approval of the DCHS parking lot and tennis court? Director Snyder.
I just have one question. Have we had any success in discussions with some surrounding parking areas? I fully intend to support this, but I think this is just kind of a start. Central has always had a parking deficiency, and I would hate to, if we pass this, to stop there. I think there's still a need for other parking in in regards to some of these other possibilities. Have we had any success with those?
We have. The Palmer administration has committed to at least leasing some space in their lot south of our high school campus during construction, and would consider the possibility of a longer-term lease or a purchase of a portion of the parking lot south of the high school, should we ask them to consider a longer-term lease or purchase. They would consider that, but they have committed to helping out during construction. We've had internal discussions and done a layout of what could be done with the Crescent Cleaners parcel if you were to choose to purchase that. It would be an additional 25 or so spaces that could be put on that parcel. And I've had a conversation with Mr. Wonderich, who owns some parcels adjacent to parcels we own across the street that could be consolidated. So other options are being considered, pursued.
I figured they were. Thank you, Mike.
Any additional discussion? Director DeFau.
And I simply would reiterate that my greatest reservation about this project is the fact that we do not have a final plan for the central pool and auditorium project, and I think this is premature because we have not finalized those plans.
Additional discussion. Director Kluhl.
Oh, I appreciate administration's initiative to create a standard for us. I think that was very helpful. I believe that administration has come forward a number of times with the information. I think that timing is critical. My question is, it's unclear in terms of the motion whether you're using 2 or 3 of the tennis courts for parking. We talked about that last meeting, about the possibility of all 3 being used as parking. It would actually move us beyond the .314 per student.
It's the original plan that you had before you that retained the 2 tennis courts on the most furthest south. Those would be retained, and the other 2 sets and some vacant land would be developed in the plan set that you already had before you. So we have not included anything other than the 90% construction documents that you've already seen.
And why was the third court not considered? I mean, we had the original plan, but there was some discussion about the fact that perhaps that tennis court is not widely used, and that doing something with that third court now rather than later would be more efficient.
The records indicate there was a request from some community organization and to retain some. I don't quite recall who, maybe Mr. McKissick would, but in the documents we have, during earlier discussions about this, there was a request from some folks to retain the one. And then, as Mr. Larison, I think, commented last week, because of the grades involved, that lower piece is quite a bit more difficult, but not impossible, to develop as parking.
And it's interesting because it was actually me that brought that issue up on behalf of United Neighbors, not having heard from them, but I know that they have a Tennis in the Hood program there, and I thought that perhaps it might be useful, so I brought that up. But that was before the time when we started talking about the parking being critical. And I think, frankly, that third court is probably not enough for Tennis in the Hood. They need more than 2 courts to be able to do that program. I know that it would be, Mr. Larison talked about the difficulty of trying to make that happen, but it certainly sounded like it was feasible. I don't know if there would be additional added, I assume there'd be some added expense, but again, if we're looking to the future, I think Davenport is growing, and I think that our parking space will slip below that .314 that we've set for the standard. We could think ahead on that now and take action, or wait until it happens. So, thoughts? Mr. Larson?
I had taken a look at that, and it's possible to make the grade work okay. And it would add about 35 parking spots. And I haven't done the cost estimate, but it basically would be adding about 25% additional, so it'd be like of the total. So the additional cost would be 25 to 30% more than the cost that it would be without that. If you've had, I don't have that budget in front of me. Do you?
Well, as a comparison to the likelihood that we would find additional spaces that Director Snyder was talking about, do you think that's likely to happen? Do you think that's going to happen?
These would be more economical.
Well, Greg was just commenting these would be more economical than the Crescent Cleaner property, for example. And I can't predict. Palmer has said that they would engage in a they were willing to discuss selling a portion of their lot. We'd have to get in that discussion and find out the terms. The Crescent Cleaner piece, we know that we would have to buy the property, demolish the building, and do the construction, and it actually lays out for about 24, 25 spaces. Mr. Larson says 35-ish we could get on that parcel, so should it be your pleasure to include that, it would be possible to do that.
Well, Mr. President, I'd like to propose to amend the motion to include all 3 tennis courts to be prepared for parking rather than the 2 that are implied.
All right, thank you. Thank you. Is there a second to the amendment?
Second.
Is there any discussion on the amendment? Excuse me a minute while I take care of this. All right, we'll take a vote on the amendment. The amendment will change the original motion to include all 3 tennis courts. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Voting only on the amendment, Director Kluhl?
Yes.
Director Dickman?
Yes.
Director Snyder?
Yes.
Director DeFau?
No.
Director Crumwitty?
Yes.
And my vote is yes. The motion carries. The motion on the floor then is to approve the DCHS parking lot and tennis courts, meaning all 3 of them. Is there additional discussion on the original motion? Director DeFau.
You talk about a 30% increase in project cost. Is that simply a 30% increase in the construction of the parking lot, or is there an additional increase for the construction of the additional tennis courts at Brady Street?
No, it would roughly be, of the portion that's for the parking lot, we would be increasing the parking lot by about 1/3, so that portion of the cost would increase by about 1/3, not the entire project cost, excluding the tennis courts at Brady.
Any additional discussion? I've got a few things. I guess the logistics or the administration of all of this, will it affect the tennis players or tennis team in any way? And what I'm getting at is timing of all of this. As you take out the tennis courts, have you already built the tennis courts? Is it at a time that there's no tennis going on? I don't understand how you do all that.
Great question. If we were to move forward in short order, I would anticipate that if we could start with some of the construction fairly quickly, we would be ready at Brady Street with the new tennis courts in time for spring tennis. So in that respect, it would have little or no impact on the tennis teams, other than if there were construction delays or something along those lines that would necessitate us moving them to another facility for a short period of time, until which time those courts were completed. So It would be minimal, I would hope.
Now, excuse me, Mr. Maloney?
Oh, I'm just going to remark we would attempt to complete the new tennis courts before April. Weather could affect that, and Scott would have to have a plan should they not be ready, but that would be our goal.
All right. Director DeFow was talking about the concern about what happens with the pool and auditorium and their impact on this decision, and the idea that this decision should probably be made after the decision on the pool and auditorium, because that is what would actually impact the parking. Now, let me ask, the way that I read all of this, and especially the letter from you, my understanding is that if we do this, then parking will be sufficient at Central. Is that a correct understanding?
If we do this, the parking would meet the standard that we would be setting at the completion of the addition of the auditorium and pool. We started out with we would need additional parking even if we were doing no construction at Central. I think Director Kluhl mentioned that moments ago. So this would get us to that standard that we've proposed after the addition of the pool and auditorium. And by doing this, it would allow us to have parking this spring when we propose to start work on the pool and auditorium. Should the pool and auditorium not be built at all, we still propose that we need additional parking for Central.
And I understand all that, but my question was, if we do this, will the parking be sufficient? Not just if it'll meet the standard. I'm saying in another year or two, I don't want to be here saying, well, we need even more parking. And so I'm asking, is it sufficient?
Maybe I could help with that. There is a new lot being proposed with the construction that I presented to you before, and that's a 66-car lot. And with that and the tennis courts, it's adequate. If you don't do either one, it would be less than adequate. So with it will be adequate, yes. But it takes those two pieces, and one of them is involved in the construction. I don't know if that's what you were asking or not.
No, I'm just asking when we get all of this done. And I think adequate and sufficient, I'm not sure if they're synonymous or not. But all I want to know is it sufficient?
Yes.
Mr. Maloney?
Yes, and with the 35 or so additional that you've just proposed, it would exceed the standard that we've just talked about. So we'll say yes, yes, sir.
And that's fine. It's just that this standard has been developed based on what you have.
Right.
And that just, I understand doing it that way. But so as I thought through all this, and I drove over there and I was looking at the area that you store vehicles and that vehicles go in for the automotive education. I don't know exactly what you call that. What is the class called?
There are multiple automotive classes that are offered. That's a kind of a set-down space for vehicles that are being worked on or storage of some materials that will be used in some of those classes from time to time.
So as I was looking at it and thinking about all this, and I was looking at those vehicles and the hill and the concrete and the doors and all of this and trying to imagine all that, because when Mr. Larison first showed us the original plans, it kind of encroached on that area, or maybe even eliminated it. So as I was thinking through this, and I'm thinking, what we're asking for, I think, is we want everything. we want all the parking to be sufficient, and we want the pool to meet the requirements that we've established, and we want the auditorium to meet all of these goals that we've established. And we need this particular automotive educational area. And I'm thinking, what if we can't do the whole thing? What if we come back in a month from now and there's a presentation of the more finalized plan for the pool and auditorium, but it encroaches so much on the automotive area that can't be done? And I'm thinking, do we go back to the drawing board, which is one of the original recommendations in that proposal? Do we consider reconsidering, do we need all 8 lanes? I don't know what's going to impact what, but it's this sense that I just want to make sure that we're going to be willing to live with, if we make this decision to do the tennis courts and the parking, and that we're going to be willing to live with something without going all the way back to the drawing board and ending up with another $30 million project that takes us 2 years to get to the point where we know that we can't do it. Does that make any sense to you?
Yes, I understand that concern. I have spoken with Mr. McKissick and Mr. Larison about the presentation on November 3rd, where you have another opportunity to go forward or not go forward. And our recent conversation was that we need to be able to tell you all of the impacts, all of the options, all of the compromises, and all of the solutions for each of those problems, so that you can make a decision after that conversation that includes a comprehensive understanding that we need to be able to propose to you every single piece, so that you know what you're buying and that we're not headed back toward 30 million, and we're very confident that we are not.
Okay, then let me ask you and Mr. McKissick, are you confident that on November 3rd we'll be able to come up with whatever compromises are needed to have the right solution for Central?
Yes, we have agreed among our team that we need to be able to give you a full, complete understanding of what's proposed and what all the costs are, and that's what we intend to do on November 3rd.
And it's consistent with this whole parking issue?
It is.
Okay. Thank you very much. Any additional discussion? Director Snyder.
I just have one other question. In regards to the footprint of the new building for the auditorium and pool, since we're not exactly sure as of yet what that footprint will be and how far into that lot it will encroach, best case scenario, how many parking spaces will we have there? Worst case, how many?
Well, we anticipate 50 to 60 of the existing lot will be remaining. The current lot is 196. And as we're developing this and working with the theater consultants and the pool consultants, it appears that footprint is going to be very accurate.
Okay.
Now there also is the 66 additional in that lot. So the total is about 120 versus the 196, right? Yep. So it's not a terrible loss, but it's always been a shortage. But when my son was a student there, it was a shortage. I think even when my wife went to school there, it was a shortage. But this, if you take this action today, I think it really helps to make adequate parking for students and staff.
Anything else? Director Dickman.
Real quick, the numbers you had estimated, approximately 200,000 to 300,000 of the project is towards the rebuilding of the tennis courts. or was that?
I'm sorry, I don't have it with me. It was 800 total, and the
Right.
smaller portion was the parking. So it's, I would say 500,
Oh.
550
Okay.
tennis courts.
Okay, I had it
And
backwards.
the smaller piece was the parking.
Okay, and the number of students who currently play tennis was around 60 or 70, if I can remember correctly.
I'd have to look specifically, but it's we have both a boys and a girls team to consider.
Okay.
So I would say conservatively probably between 50 and 60. I
Okay.
don't know exactly what that number is. I haven't seen that roster in the last couple of weeks.
I just did some quick back of the envelope type calculations here, and we're per student for those tennis courts going to be spending around $4,000 when you do the multiplication. And I'm just thinking, as we had the Monroe presentation here earlier tonight, that what if we spent $4,000 per student worth of improvements in the Monroe building? That what a bit difference that would make in student achievement versus I can't be sure, but I get the feeling that the students who are doing extracurriculars and that's helping their student improvement or student achievement by keeping them involved in school, I get the impression that they might be able to find alternate physical activities that keep them engaged, or that they might be able to play tennis without making it part of their school day. So I guess I just want to put that out there, that I really feel like this district is putting too much emphasis on high school students having absolutely top-notch facilities, while our elementary school students are not getting their fair share.
Any additional discussion? Director Clue.
I appreciate Director Dickman's concern. I understand it. And I oftentimes think if we could operate our schools in the United States like the Germans do, where the Germans do school at school and they have sports and clubs afterwards. It's not part of the school district, but that culture is huge. And while I appreciate the concern, I think culture-wise that we owe our students at Central the same opportunities that we have at North and West at this point. There may be a time in the future, and I hope it comes soon, that we reconsider the culture of how we fund the athletic programs in our schools. But as for right now, this is the way it is.
Anything else? Director Dickman.
While I appreciate that our students do have the option of changing from one high school to another, whereas we're not giving our students at Monroe the opportunity to learn in a building where they have adequate space, apparently.
Anything else? A couple more questions. Mr. Maloney, you're confident that safety isn't compromised in any way by having Harrison between parking and the school, and there are no safety concerns getting the students down to the courts that would be at Brady Street?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And then the other thing, that whole issue of relating all of this back to the walk zones. And I don't recall if you and I had a conversation on that, but can you just help me understand where we are relative to the parking standard and compare that to our walk zone requirements?
Okay, my recollection was that the discussion was about high school students don't get bus transportation unless they're more than 2 miles from the campus. And we were concerned about how far it was to walk from the car to the entry, and the juxtaposition of those two kind of contrary views was the discussion. I don't know how to help with it.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you had an explanation for me. I still can't reconcile those two. I can't say that students who drive should be able to walk within 650 yards, but students who don't drive, according to the law, may have to walk up to 3 miles. And so I think, Mr. Scott, you and I talked about some additional maybe thoughts, and I think in the standards, some of those thoughts you might think about incorporating them for the future. Any other discussion? Okay, we'll call for the vote. And this vote has been amended so that it's the approval of the DCHS parking lot, and that includes all 3 tennis courts. Director Crumwitty.
Yes.
Director Kluel.
Yes.
Director Snyder.
Yes.
Director Dickman.
No.
Director DeFau.
No.
My vote is yes. Motion passes. May I have a motion regarding approval of the superintendent contract?
Mr. President,
Director Snyder.
I move that the board accept the administration's recommendation to approve the superintendent's contract as presented.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion? Director Kluel.
I'm glad that the board has recommended to approve this in this motion. I am most pleased, having recently attended an event, the ribbon cutting for the Creative Arts Academy. It just becomes more and more apparent to me some of the leadership that our superintendent has done in the district. The board has certainly done its share, but I think as our CEO superintendent, the superintendent has done a great job of leading this district forward. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Any other discussion, Director Crumwitty?
Yes, just quickly. I'm very pleased with Dr. Tate's performance, and I commend him in all the many new initiatives that he's brought into this district. And like Director Kluel just indicated, continually works with others in the community, different community organizations, to improve our schools and certainly making our school district a district of distinction. So I want to thank him for all of his hard work.
Any additional discussion? Yeah, I wanted to say thank you as well. I think that this is a big district, and there's a lot that goes into leadership, and I think that the values, the ethics, everything that's brought by Superintendent Tate, along with a lot of these initiatives and the guidance and leadership and management and everything that goes into it, I wanted to say thank you very much as well, and I'm glad to support the passing of this contract. Is there any additional discussion? Okay, we'll call for the vote. Director Snyder.
Yes.
Director Crumwitty.
Yes.
Director Kluel.
Yes.
Director Dickman.
Yes.
Director DeFau.
Yes.
And my vote is yes. Motion passes. May I have a motion regarding approval of delegate to IASB Assembly and Convention November of 2014?
Mr. President,
Director Dickman.
I move the administration's recommendation that the board approve Director Jamie Snyder to serve as the Davenport School Board delegate to the IASB Assembly and Director Johansson as the alternate.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion? Call for the vote. Director Dickman.
Yes.
Director DeFau.
Yes.
Director Crumwitty.
Yes.
Director Kluel.
Yes.
Director Snyder.
Yes.
And my vote is yes. Motion carries. Thank you. Move on to discussion items. Director DeFau. Oh, excuse me.
I believe
Oh
we
my
began
gosh.
at 6.
It's been 2 hours already. I apologize. I didn't even notice. We do have a couple of additional items, including discussion of our policies, and then we're going to have a discussion on our budget shortfall. We have had a couple of hours of sitting around. we'll have a 5-minute recess, and we'll resume in a little bit. Thank you. I don't know where Director Crumwoody is. Okay. Well, we'll go ahead and get started anyway. Director Defoe, would you like to lead our discussion on policy?
I would love to. So in your board packets or online were a series of policies that are being brought forward by the policy committee for discussion. The first one was 605.10, which is multicultural and gender fair approaches to the educational program, to educational programming. And this is a policy that the language is derived specifically from Iowa Code, because we questioned our attorney in regard to gender fair versus gender neutral, and the language in the code is gender fair and specifies the protected groups that are referenced in the bullets at the end of the policy in terms of what materials we need to develop. We did in the paragraph 3 amend the protected classes to be inclusive of all of those that we reference in other policies, so we're consistent. And as always, included Dr. Goldstone as the Director of Equity and Student Support. Any questions or comments regarding that policy? Director Kluhl?
Just a couple. I was curious, the policy committee's done a lot to take philosophy out of our policy, and I really like the first 2 paragraphs, but they really aren't policy. I'm wondering what the policy committee, if they had a discussion on that.
I do not recall that we did. Director Johansson or Snyder, would you
I don't recall.
reflect on that?
I don't believe we did.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't recall any conversation on it.
I mean, I really like them, and I guess if there's one policy that I would say that's okay, it's providing background here, because they're very nice words. And diversity is part of our mission statement. So I'll, if there's no other comments from the board on that, and I doubt that there are, I just would like to, perhaps as a rhetorical statement at this point, but this is an opportunity to talk about our ability to be taking pride in our diversity and the belief that we have in diversity. And it's not showing up in our teaching staff. And we've all talked about that, and Superintendent Tate has told us that he's doing everything that he possibly can. But I still am puzzled, but I can't give it up, that there is some way to bring diversity into our workforce. I mean, I think about the HBUs, the historically black universities that we're going to recruit at, and I'm thinking what a difficult job it must be to tell people that they should come to Davenport. I mean, no mountains, no oceans, no real nightlife. I realize how difficult it is, but I just wonder, has there been discussion in administration? Have you come up with any other ideas for how we might do a better job of trying to recruit? Perhaps that's going a bit too far, so I'm going to leave this rhetorical and say that I was talking with somebody just today about our, what are we calling it, where we're working with our paras to give them stipends, grow your own. I think that's one effort that we're making. We've got people here, if we can work with them, if they're racially diverse especially. I think that's one way that we might make it happen. So I just wanted to take this opportunity with this policy to talk about diversity and our staff. But I have no further comments for the policy committee.
Are there any other comments? Director Johansson.
Yeah, thank you. I agree in general that I think the policy committee, and I think the board really does try to take the philosophical introductions in a lot of these policies out. And yet it does seem almost like this one is kind of appropriate. And the policy committee, I think, occasionally finds that. And sometimes, and especially when it's been reviewed by the administration, and sometimes it just seems to fit. But I do believe in general in the concept of trying to remove those philosophical statements.
Any other comments? Okay. If not, we'll continue on. The next policy in your packet is a draft policy regarding animals on district property. And if I'll take just a moment, we do not have an existing policy relevant to animals on district property, and the reason this came before the policy committee is that President Johansson had fielded several inquiries about what was and was not permissible on campus. And I don't know if, Ralph, you would like to speak to those concerns that were brought to you and why we are bringing forward this policy.
Yeah. Excuse me a minute. I'm not able to get into my policies here.
So I'm just trying to give some background as to why we even began the discussion.
On the animals?
Correct.
Yes, thank you for that question. There were a number of things that were going on out in our district. One is that people had observed other people bringing dogs to the stadium, was one. I had some concerns by some administrators from last year's registration where one of the parents came in with a 3-foot iguana across her chest. And, as if, well, that's no big deal. And these things started us thinking about the safety and what's going on with animals. And there may have been some other issues, and clearly animals are part of our education. And so we tried to address all of that as well. But and then the whole issue of therapy animals and service animals. So those came up too, and we had one parent that came in with a dog into the school saying that he was training the dog to be a service or therapy dog. And so all these things drew questions, and that's really the background. It's taken us probably a year or so to come to grips with some of this.
Thank you, Director Johansson. And I will share with other members of the board that in trying to come up with a draft policy for your consideration, we did review several other policies from other districts. The language and definitions that are included are those that are consistent with both ADA requirements and other statutes. We've had Wendy Meyer with Lane and Waterman review twice the draft policy to make sure that we were in compliance with any laws and statutes that we would have to follow. As we began, at first it was more toward what is allowable in terms of bringing animals to our campuses and other facilities, and then it became clear that we probably should develop a service animal policy for our buildings. And so that has then grown from the original thought process. So if you've had the opportunity to review it, or I welcome comments. Director Dickman.
I'll just start out with the first comment in the sidebar, the contemplation of families walking their kids and then walking their dogs around the track. I don't know if I would feel comfortable with having someone walking their dogs on school property. Is that I'm making the correct assumption there? Because we don't know that they are a parent, and depending on how long they stay, that could create problems with recess, or if they're having a fire drill or something of that nature. So I think that it would be fair to ask people not to bring animals onto the property unless it is a service dog during the school day. And then also the second comment that it probably should be written permission if it is an exception, just so that there's not confusion about, well, so-and-so said offhand.
Sure, and I appreciate those comments. And I should make note that the comments that were left are notes that actually were clarifying questions from Wendy when she reviewed the policy. She thought there was some ambiguity in some certain areas. And, you know, I know that there are several situations when outside the curricular day, families may avail themselves of district property and playgrounds, and there probably are opportunities or situations where animals are brought on to our campuses at that time. So, you know, how do we balance that? I mean, we're not going to have people policing their property outside of school hours. So, yeah, I'll note, though, I've noted your concern, and we will talk about it in the committee. Other comments? Director Snyder?
I don't remember from our discussion, but I've noticed since we've had the discussion at the policy meeting, I've seen quite a few parents walking their kids to school and just like walking the dog with them there, drop the kid off and then walk back. Say like Harrison, for example, I've seen, you know, they walk up just a little ways onto the property, the kid goes into the school, they turn around and leave. How does that, I don't even remember, did we address like that in regards to the policy?
Well, I think it's a matter at this point of interpretation, but I would say in general that would not be allowed as the policy is currently written. And, you know, I think that with clearly defined expectations and strong communication, you're able to manage situations like that. For example, in our soccer complex, animals are not allowed. It's clearly posted, and people understand that if they bring an animal to the soccer complex, they'll be asked to remove it. I agree that walking a child back and forth to school seems to have a different threshold, but yeah, I think we'll have to come to terms as a board of what we do and do not want to allow in terms of permissiveness. So, does anybody else have any comments relevant to that, or thoughts about permissibility? Director Crumwitty?
Well, I think Director Snyder brings up a good point. I would be very concerned if we would limit that. I would certainly want to encourage parents to walk with their children to school, and I think that might mean taking the dog along for a morning walk. And I don't want to be too restrictive with this policy, and I think doing something like that might be a real negative for some parents. And you know, I don't think having a policy like this. Have we had issues? Have we had issues with people walking their children and their dogs to school? I think if we have, then we should have a more restrictive policy. If not, if it's working, I think we keep it the way it is. You know, I have some real concerns about being real restrictive. I would say if we're going to have a policy about pets in school, pets in the school building, I would be very concerned about. pets, service animals, and so forth. We've had them in this district. Other surrounding districts have them. Hospitals have them. Rest homes have them. Nursing homes. I just want, I want this policy not to be too restrictive.
Okay, and this policy certainly does not limit service animal access to our
Right.
buildings in
Right.
any manner. So I want to be clear about that for the public that may be listening and not have access to the policy itself. And I do believe, again, that the origin of the request for us to consider came from the fact that our building administrators were being challenged when people wanted to bring animals into the building, when they were told no, and the response was, well, show me where your policy is. It says I can't. And that's really where this derived from.
And that's what I was saying.
Mhm.
Into the building, I think is a different, completely different story.
Director Johansson.
And I understand the thought process, and in fact, generally, it'd be nice if we didn't have to have any policies. I think about some of the difficulty in trying to define where you can and can't do this, because one of the things that is part of this is Brady Street Stadium and other district properties. And so I'm just thinking about some of the difficulty of, are we going to say, inside certain boundaries? I just need to think through it a little bit. But I think what you're saying is under some of those, give a little bit of flexibility. Okay, thanks.
Any other comments relevant to this policy? Director Dickman?
Just a wording suggestion. We could say restrict it, no animals within buildings, within gated area, or on playgrounds. I'm not sure if any of our playgrounds are unfenced currently.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Okay, because I think that would be the only area outside of a clearly marked fence or gate that I would be really concerned about having stray dogs. And thank you for mentioning the therapy dogs. I think that those are a great benefit to our schools and our students. And so I'm glad that we're making sure that those are still feeling welcome.
Okay. Director Klohl.
I'm just wondering about, earlier we had a real short discussion on comparing spending money on students at Monroe versus on tennis courts, and I think that's visionary stuff. I think that's important things to think about. I'm wondering how much time the board is going to spend on animal control. I'm concerned about that as a board policy versus an administrative regulation. I appreciate the work that the policy committee is doing, but I want to voice a concern that I don't think this is the venue for this kind of discussion. I think that we have important things to discuss. I think animal control is something that administration would be well capable of dealing with. Just a thought.
Well, and I appreciate that comment, but I would respectfully disagree, especially given that service animals are spoken to in ADA legislation, that we are legally obligated to not only allow service animals, but provide for a means of disallowing them. And you'll see in this policy that there are instances where a service animal can be disallowed and what that process is. And so there are very specific legal requirements. So I do think that's big B, big P board policy.
You don't think those things would be carried well as administrative regulation?
I do not. And the fact that our administrators have been challenged to show me the policy that says I am prohibited from doing this. And really the whole conversation occurred because an administrator brought that concern to Ralph. It wasn't that he just, was reflecting on service animals or animals in general, and that, perhaps we should have a policy. It was at a direct request from an administrator, so I do believe it is appropriate.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Okay. Moving on to 60305, instruction, and this is religion-based excuse from school program or activity. And Director Klool may note that the first sentence was stricken as a philosophical statement. So other than that, there were no recommended changes. We're with you, Rich. So, any comments in regard to this policy? Okay. And moving on, 60501, progress reports of students, and this was reviewed by the administration with no recommended changes. Any comments relevant to that policy? 60502, instruction testing program, and this is a policy that is required by No Child Left Behind federal legislation. And there were no recommended changes. Okay, Director Crumlity.
And I apologize. I want to go back to progress reports for students. And it says K through 12. Do we not do anything with preschool and reporting to parents?
It's a good question. Is there anyone here with the administration that could answer that question?
I don't know. I can find out for you. They have conferences, but I don't know about a report card. Is that what you're asking about?
Well, I would certainly hope that we're doing some communication of student progress at preschool, and if we're going to have a policy, I would certainly want to make it a preschool through 12 policy, not just K through 12.
That would make sense. So
You'd have to spell out the 4-year-old, three, where do you start and where do you stop kind of thing, but yeah, I can talk to Mrs. Conrad about it.
So we'll get that information and bring that to the next policy committee meeting, and then if we need to amend it, we will do so. So moving back to 60502 testing program. No comments. So that brings us to a series of policies that the policy committee has worked on relevant to tobacco-free environment and the proliferation, for lack of a better word, of electronic nicotine delivery systems, otherwise known as personalized vaporizers. And the board is, in its whole, gave consent to the policy committee to review these policies and to come back with some language changes so as to prohibit those electronic nicotine delivery systems. It rolls off the tongue, it really does. And to incorporate that into all of the policies that we have that touch upon a tobacco-free school environment, and you'll see there were several policies relevant to that. Comments, questions? So the first one's 103.15, which is tobacco-free environment. Director Klool?
I wonder if you could reflect on discussions you've had with the school district's attorney regarding placing restrictions within our schools that aren't allowed by by state law. Talking about Dillon's rule that we talked about last meeting.
Director Johansson.
Thank you. Yes, and I apologize for not having that reference here. I will have it the next time the policy committee comes. I did have a discussion with our attorney, and she said that certainly Dillon's rule applies. But there's another rule in the code that allows a board to conduct business as it needs to. And something like this is something that she thought was clearly within the purview of the board to go ahead and establish a policy. But for your reference, I'll have that in the future. I apologize for not having it tonight.
Appreciate it. For my own edification, I'd like to see that.
Certainly. Any comments relevant to the tobacco-free environment policy? Okay. The next policy then is discipline, 504.01, and again we incorporated electronic nicotine delivery systems, and I note that electronic is removed from that title, and personalized vaporizers, which is the other, definition du jour of what that product is. So,
This is another case where you felt it was appropriate to leave the philosophy of discipline in the policy?
Yeah, absolutely. It wasn't our intention to modify the discipline policy with the exception of including personalized nicotine delivery systems and personalized vaporizers into the language. I think if there's any conversation about philosophical statements, that is a different conversation.
So when will this policy come up for review again?
So if you want to have that conversation now, you're welcome to do so.
Will it change the 5-year cycle since it's being modified?
Yes.
So to kick it back 5 years?
Well, knowing that there have been many times in the past that we have brought a policy forward. I guess my suggestion would be is if you want to modify it beyond what we're discussing tonight, that you would submit something to the policy committee to be considered.
I think what I'll do is I think this is still systemic in our policies, and I have a larger request I think that I will make. So given that this is one of many policies where we still have retained that, some places appropriately, some probably not, I will go with the bigger question and put this one aside.
Okay. I think we are very concerned that we swiftly amend the policy if we do want to prohibit these devices. Director Johansson went on a little information expedition, which he may care to elaborate on in the course of our conversation here, as to, what is ingestible via these systems and non-detectable, and that really do have the potential of not bringing simply nicotine, but other illegal drugs into the building completely undetected. And people are using them on our school grounds. Director Johansson.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity. I do have to say that from from kind of my engineering background, and my business background, the devices are really pretty well made, and it's an interesting business. I did go to the vapor shop that is near West. It's over near our old children's village. I went there twice, as a matter of fact. But trying to understand this, we've also done a lot of research, reading and understanding all of this. But basically, these vape devices have a small heating element. They have a solution that's vegetable oil based, and they have a wick. So you wick this material up, it vaporizes it, and there's a specific way that you have to vape this to get it into your system. What happens is that generally these vapor materials have 2 levels of nicotine, and that's why they're called a nicotine delivery system. There's a regular and then a high, and then they can really jack it up if you really want to. But in our review, there are additional things that you can put into these. For instance, you can put THC into these, and you can vape THC. There's something called Cloud 9, which is a non-detectable drug that hasn't even, the government hasn't figured out how to understand this Cloud9, but there have been some fatalities attached to that. And as well, of course, some of the other bad effects. One of the times that I was in there, there were two young men who I couldn't tell whether they were students or not, but they each had one of these, and they were very adept at the apparent use of them, the language that's used in talking about these things, and it was easy for them to just stick them in their pockets, pull them out, and go on with it. I think it's our position that we do need, as Director DeFau said, there's an urgency, I think, attached to preventing this. Otherwise, theoretically, and I think Director DeFau, you saw somebody actually puffing on an e-cigarette in one of our schools. And the e-cigarette is a little bit different, but it's the same genre as a vaporizer, nicotine delivery system, or personalized vaporizer.
Thank you. Director Klool.
Whenever I see Tara start to type, I start to pay attention. I want to make it clear that I do not support vaping devices. It's a technical issue to make sure that the district is in compliance with state law. That's all.
Bennett.
I do know from like personal experience of seeing like people using these out of school property that it is something that you guys need to look into helping.
Thank you. Rachel, did you have anything to add? Okay. Any other comments relevant to the discipline policy? Okay. The next policy is search and seizure, again incorporating personalized nicotine delivery systems or electronic nicotine delivery systems and personalized vaporizers into our search and seizure policy. You'll also note that there in red is non-FDA approved products for smoking cessation. That's consistent with our other policies. It's just we went back and we made sure that everything we were referencing in each policy was there. So we're not trying to remove an adult's use of like a nicotine patch or something as part of a smoking cessation program, but it's the non-FDA approved products that have been referenced in other policies, and so for consistency that is incorporated where it was missed. And the last policy is 50404, substance abuse. And you know, in regard to Director Klool's comment about Dillon's Law, this is a policy where we did expand our own definition of what was prohibited several years ago, and we were, you know, we were not challenged on that. So underneath the definition, that Iowa Code Chapter 204 is where it specifically references that we expanded the definition beyond what was listed in Iowa Code. And there again, you'll see the three references. Maria?
Do our remaining school board members know what Dillon's rule is? Do you want to explain it better than I can, or I'll give it a shot. Dillon's rule basically means that we cannot make rules that the state legislature does not give us permission to make. Does that make any sense at all? Okay.
Yeah, a good example is when one of the other school districts north of us tried to establish a dress code, and they weren't allowed to do it. And the reason they weren't allowed to do it is because state law does not allow us to tell students what to wear. We can only tell you what not to wear. So we can have a dress code that prohibits you from wearing clothing that references alcohol or drugs or tobacco or other things. But we can't tell you to wear a uniform as a public school. So, One other comment that I'd like to make in regard to the last policy, the substance abuse policy, is that under curriculum, because there's a reference of Iowa Code that states that we need to teach awareness of the effects of alcohol, tobacco, drugs, etc., and because there's still no clear information about the effects of electronic nicotine delivery systems, we added the word known, the known effects. So we thought that that would be sufficient in that regard. So, questions relevant to the last policy or comments? Rachel.
I just want to say that I do agree with like getting a policy in place of not allowing these in school, because like me on a personal level, the vapor that these things kind of emit, they also come with a really bad smell with some of them. I mean, I know they're flavored for certain things, but like I can't stand the smell. It's kind of the same with like people with body spray at school, and they puff it up and you're, oh, okay, please don't. So it kind of goes in lines with that. Like I can't breathe around that stuff, and it'd be really nice not to have that near or around the school. So.
It could also be like an asthma concern, because I know some people have those with the Axe or whatever they use.
Okay, so it's safe to say that both of you have had personal experience where you've been with peers who are actively using these devices.
Well, I haven't, like, I've seen them from a distance at school, but I haven't been around anyone using them at school. But I know, like, some adults, like, in my personal life that use them, and just, I have to walk away from them because I can't be that close, so.
Okay. I appreciate your willingness to share your opinions, both of you. So, anything else? That concludes the policy committee, or policy discussion.
Okay, thank you very much, Director DeFau. We'll move on to our discussion on budget shortfall. Superintendent Tate.
Thank you, Mr. President. Marcia is going to bring us up to date on what the budget looks like and what our challenges are going to be, considering this year when we're looking at budget reductions as well as into the future, and remind us of some stakes we've had in the ground as far as unspent balances. So, Marcia?
We have preliminary results back from our certified annual report that we file from the state, and also from our financial audit that they're just finishing up on. And both of those reports indicate that our fund balance, our general fund balance, has increased from $21 million to $25 million, which is good. That's the cash in the bank that we have. Unfortunately, those reports also indicate that our unspent balance is down to $6.9 million at the end of last year, and prior to that it was at $10.7 million. So you can see that we're on the downward slope. And just as a reminder that the unspent balance is the accumulation of spending authority from year to year. We get to carry that forward from every year, so it's leftover spending authority, if you will. In looking at all the information, what I've determined is that if the district makes no additional budget reductions, if we wouldn't do anything after this year, that we will come close to exceeding our spending authority in fiscal 2016. It's not that not only will we not hit the target that the board has set, but that we will exceed what we have left in unspent balance. To remind you of how we got that target in March of 2012, we had discussions regarding what that target should look like. And we had set it at a level of unspent balance per pupil of roughly $500 per pupil, or that's where we got the $8 million on roughly 16,000 students, or an unspent balance ratio of 5%. When Larry Siegel was here last year, he also confirmed that the district should be between that 5 and 10% level of unspent balance, but did note that among the UEN districts, of the original 8 UEN districts, that average was really around 11%. But given the targeted unspent balance of $8 million, which the board set, and then looking at the fund balance, the unspent balance of where we were at the end of fiscal 14, I came up with the reduction amounts we need. And I gave you a couple different budget reduction scenarios because, as you know, the legislature has not set the allowable growth or this supplemental aid for 2016. So it's kind of an estimate. I gave you two estimates at 3% growth and at 4% growth. And also I gave you scenarios if you want to take 2 years to hit your target or if you want to take 3 years. So if we were at 3% growth for 2016 and you wanted to take 2 years to hit your target, we would be looking at 2 years of budget reductions of $4.5 million. Whereas if you wanted to take 3 years to hit that target with a 3% growth, you would be looking at budget reductions in the first year of $3.25 million, and then for the next 2 years, $3.5 million. And again, the legislature has not set that supplemental state aid percentage. Larry Sigel, in listening to webinars that he has been presenting, he is telling school districts use 3% as an estimate. So he's confirming the estimate that I was using. One thing I did want to note is that it's important to understand that the budget reduction information I'm giving you is based on a couple of estimates. One is that what they're going to set that supplemental state aid percentage at, and the second is that the projections, the estimates that I gave you was based on steady enrollment, that we don't have any changes in our enrollment. Our date to certify our enrollment is Wednesday. And I can share with you that our preliminary enrollment numbers show that we are down 200 students. So unless something drastically changes between now and Wednesday, that is an additional $1.3 million in funding that we won't be receiving. So I wanted to put that caveat in there. Just received that information, so I didn't work it into my budget estimates. I worked it based on a steady enrollment, but I wanted to let you know. And there could be other things that could impact what that figure would do. But for right now, given the estimates that we're using and the information that we know, we've got a couple different scenarios for you to look at as to where you want to set your budget reductions for the coming year.
Is that it?
That's it, in a nutshell.
Thank you for the presentation. Are there any questions for Marcia? So as I looked at this and I thought about, and I just ran a couple quick numbers because I don't have all of the numbers I would need, but if we went to 2% growth, if I just used a simple ratio, going from, if I said the ratio of the reduction amount needed is the same, going from 4% 2 years to hit growth or hit goal, 3% growth 2 years. And if I go to 2%, I simply added 1.25 million, which made it a 5.75 million per year in 2 years if we only had 2% growth. Is that kind of right?
Yeah, that would be pretty accurate.
Okay, and that's a big number.
It's a very big number.
That's huge. So, and I know we've got this 3 years to hit the goal, but you're recommending 2 years, and you're saying that if we do this, and if we have 3 or 4% growth, we will be okay with our unspent balance.
That's correct. And that 2-year recommendation goes back to what the board had set when they originally established that $8 million figure. And I believe they had said that they wanted to reach that goal by fiscal 2017.
Okay. I don't think I have any more questions. Director Kluhl.
Just a follow-up to that. I mean, that was the goal that the board set, but fiscally, is it wise for us at this point, given the potential reduction in students' numbers, to pursue that 2-year goal?
I think the goal that you're setting is really conservative. I mean, based on what the other UENs are doing, we're probably on the low end of where we would be setting our target. So $8 million, I wouldn't go below $8 million for a target.
But the time frame to get there?
I mean, you certainly could take 3 years and hope that maybe things would turn around, and we would still have a sufficient unspent balance that we wouldn't we wouldn't have to worry about overspending it, but we certainly would have to be on target with the reductions that we would make in each of those 3 years.
Thank you.
Director Dickman?
I'd like to think that I can be an eternal optimist. The end of this night here is not proving that to be very true. First we were talking about 3 million, and then 4 million, and now it's almost seeming like it would be the smart move to aim to cut around 5 million, knowing that some of those cuts might not end up being as sustainable and unexpected expenses. Is that cutting 5 million? Is that a number you would recommend?
It certainly isn't on. I don't think it's too much.
It's not going to be fun, and as you said, it's a big number, but I think that we need to do it. We need to find a way, because otherwise if we try to do the smallest amount, then we're going to get the community mad at us again for each little bit that we keep doing. Whereas if we end up with a little extra buffer zone, then we can hire additional math coaches, or like with the high schools, we were talking about summer school when the panel of teachers was here, and that if we make the bigger cut of around 5 million, that if we do end up with a little extra unspent balance, that we could then use that funding to address some of the student achievement or some of our board priorities. And then also for our student board members, the UEN is Urban Education Network, so that's districts that are similar to us in Iowa. Oh, and the unspent balance, I don't know if you guys are clear on this. I guess you'll probably be some of our best messengers, that the state will not allow us to spend more than a certain amount. So even if we raise property taxes, there is no, or even if we got grants, there's no way around some of these cuts.
Thank you. Additional discussion. Director Crumwitty.
I brought this up before, Marcia, concerning the Affordable Care Act and what impact that might have. Have you heard any more about that and how that might, too, impact what we're doing here with budget cuts?
I did include in my projections a modest increase in our insurance premiums of 5%. I think that's probably more than what we need to cover the Affordable Health Care Act cost. Tim Kearns is going to be coming to present before the board in November, and we'll have some more detailed information for you then.
Okay, thanks.
Anything else? Director DeFau.
I guess I would add that I appreciate Director Kluhl's comments about whether or not we need to look beyond 2 years to reach our goal, given the real potential that we could be looking at, a $6 million cut. If we get 3% allowable growth, and if we've lost 200 students, then we know we're not going to receive 3%. So that 4.5 becomes a conservative number in a 2-year scenario. So what I think the biggest takeaway is that we really do need to look again for sustainable cuts. Our 2.8 million last year was 800,000 in sustainable cuts and 2 million of insurance holidays. So we don't have that luxury this time around.
Superintendent Tate.
Thank you, Mr. President. Really, there's a couple levels. One is just the sort of, here are the numbers, here's what the chief financial officer recommends. We can divide the numbers any way we want. We need to begin to think about what's the hit on education as we do this. Back to, do we do it in 2 years or 3 years? Because there's probably a point at which I'll say we just can't do that if we want to keep going. Now, I want to know where this 200 is. Is it elementary, intermediate, high school? I want to know which schools. I mean, this speaks to me of closing schools. This speaks to me of consolidating class size and things of that nature. I mean, if it's 200 students, you cannot do business as usual if we lost that amount. I want to know, why we lost them, where we lost them, so we'll do that. But again, as we look at will it be 2 years or 3, we have to just look at what kind of reductions are you going to have to make and how much can we take all in 1 year? Because there's only so much the body can take in the way of damage, and, it's almost like a body we're talking about here, so.
Anything else? I wanted to remark on the ice cream social that we just had recently. And what I heard during that from at least one and maybe more of the legislators was the discussion about their responsibility or their requirement by law to have a budget within 30 days. And that I don't know if it was that they don't typically do that, but they don't have to abide by that law. Is that your understanding?
I can say that as long as I've worked in this position, it's only been the past couple of years that I can remember where they have not set the budget. Typically, they have abided by that provision of the law and set the allowable growth, so we knew what our funding would be.
But if they don't set the budget, then you and we have to assume the worst case, which is 0. Is that correct?
That's true. That's where we will be required to certify our budget in April if they haven't set it by then. And because they have missed that deadline, it has already impacted some of our funding for 2016. For example, our dropout prevention funding. If we do not have that percentage set, we are automatically locked at this year's funding level. So we know already in 2016 that we've lost funding in our dropout prevention program.
And what date is the requirement for the certified budget?
April 15th.
And what date is the requirement to notify teachers if they're going to have some notification?
I believe it's the end of April.
So there's a 2-week window there that, excuse me? Oh, it's April 15th also?
Is it?
So,
It's the 15th.
okay, thank you. So it's the same date. And when I look at these, even though Larry Sigel may have said we're likely to get 3%, for some reason I don't have the same confidence in the legislature that we're going to see 3%. And that's why I was going back to that 2%. And I'm thinking 2% and maybe even 0%, depending on what they decide. And it may not be timely as well. I think all of this says to me is that we still, somehow there are going to have to be the big cuts. This insurance holiday still concerns me, but anyway, and I think the whole board is on the same or in nearly the same place here. I just want to make sure as we go forward here, because some of the next steps will be, well, we've got one coming up, which will be next month, the decision just on block versus traditional. And that's an example of one of those issues that'll affect the budget. Is there any additional discussion? Director Kluhl.
And I think, like the presentations we had earlier this evening from Kim Finley with the Putnam and from T.J. Schneckloff from Monroe, the difficulty is getting the word out about the programs that they have. And I think here our effort is to get the word out about the difficulty of this decision and what it's really going to mean to our community. And we've heard from the student school board members and some of the presenters tonight about the block schedule and how much we want to retain that block schedule. Well, the board is in a position to understand all of that, but at the same time realize their fiscal accountability responsibilities. I believe that the block schedule is a very important aspect of how we deliver education, and I support it fully. but that's one of several areas. Dr. Tate talked about school closure. That's a reality that may happen, and I just want that message to get out to the public that we are in dire situations here. And I don't want anybody to be surprised when the board starts talking about these significant cuts to education.
Director Crumwitty.
I think that's absolutely right, Director Cluel. I had a conversation the other night at the ice cream social with some educators in the district, and they were sharing with me that there was some communication sent out to teachers, and teachers who we would think, and administrators who we would think are aware of the seriousness of this, were saying, wow, this is a surprise to us. It's like we need to start communicating to our own personnel as well as our parents. We have a big problem here financially, and we need to get that word out to everybody in this district that we would hope that some people would also help us in thinking about other ways we can do business and save some money.
Thank you. Director DeFau.
Yeah, and I think that part of the reason for that, and I agree that people don't share the same urgency that we are feeling, is because we have been very effective in the last several years of minimizing the impact of budget cuts by being able to diversify where those cuts have fallen. So, people have, when we've consistently been saying we need to cut this level of money, we've been able to do so without having a huge impact in the classroom. I don't know that we're going to have that luxury this time.
Thank you. Any additional discussion? Thank you very much, Marcia. That was enlightening.
Enlightening. It's depressing.
All right, we'll move on to administrative reports.
None, Mr. President.
Okay, thank you very much. We do have a few board requests. I've got 3 of them here. Are there any board reports? Director DeFau.
I just might add that while Rachel mentioned the success of MetroFest last week, what she failed to mention was she was one of 3 soloists that was selected to perform from North High School that evening. I'm not sure if Central or West had any representation, but we had Pierre Young and Josh Reed and Rachel Garlock who were selected as soloists for that event. So very proud of their accomplishments.
Great, thank you. Any other reports? Director Dickman.
It's funny that we had the Putnam here earlier. I was going to mention them. I went to an event, I believe Thursday. They were showing a short film documentary of Any Kid Anywhere, and our students at West High School helped inspire them to make the movie about sex trafficking right here in Iowa. And I certainly feel enlightened after watching it. And I know that they're working on grants and things like that so that they can bring that programming to our schools. And I'm excited, and I'm hopeful that we can work well together.
Any other reports? Director Cluel.
Well, I'm reflecting on the ice cream social, and I guess the funny thing about politics is that I felt so good after that social, because we had all of our local legislators there except Senator Singh, who's undergoing chemo, I believe, for brain cancer. But they were all there and heard some most enlightened conversation about the things that they were doing for us. But yet here we are with this presentation that Marcia just gave us, and it's interesting that we are going out. Some of the stuff that Ellen Riley, for instance, the grants that she went out for and Rachel has done, we are finding money from every place we can. We're leveraging our resources at home, but we can't do it without the help of the state legislature. And so I wonder, about saying how happy I was to have held that ice cream social. I mean, the ice cream was fine, yeah, and our intent in the social is not to propagandize, not to solicit votes on particular issues, but to build relationships. I'm satisfied that we have good relationships, but I'm not seeing the results of those relationships in terms of listening to the concerns that local school board members are offering. So I'm happy to have had the ice cream social, but I'm disappointed that our legislators are not doing more to try to work with us in our local communities.
Director Crumwoody.
I too would like to comment on the ice cream social. First of all, Director Kluhl did a phenomenal job of putting that all together, along with Mary Crothers, and I want to thank both of them for all their hard work. It's the largest group we've ever had in all the time I think that we have had this ice cream social, and good conversation, students interacting a lot, and our legislators worked with individual groups that evening. So I thought it was a great experience, but we need to continually have the conversation. And that's why when I was going through the announcements tonight, I stopped at the one about the legislative forum. This is an opportunity that I think all of us need to take. Come to the forum and express our concerns to those folks, because we need to keep that message alive. It's just not a one-shot deal. A bus trip to Des Moines, I mean, we need to continually contact them with letters, emails, any opportunity. In my conversation on the LRC this summer, a lot of school boards are inviting legislators to come to school board meetings, especially this time of the year when we're talking about serious budget cuts. And that might be something we need to think about. But let's all try to make it to the forum at the end of this month.
Director Snyder.
I almost forgot. Our kids at Mid-City High School attended the Iowa Youth Congress 2 weeks ago. And congratulations to them for being responsible and for one, I believe, of three. Is it three? I'm wrong a lot. My wife tells me that. One of three bills that's going to hit the Congress floor in regards to distracted driving in relation to hands-free calling. So congratulations to them. They took it last year, and it didn't quite make it. They made a few tweaks to it this year along with some others, and it's going through. So I couldn't be more proud of them.
Any additional reports? Director Kluhl.
I just did want to briefly mention the ribbon cutting ceremony for the Creative Arts Academy that was held last week. It was a wonderful event, a celebratory event, a grand opening of sorts at the Davenport Main Library, and we had the mayor there. We had Bob Waterman from the Hubble Waterman grant. We just had all kinds of people there, and it was so cool to be up in front to see that crowd of people surrounded by those sixth graders and dream students there who are members of the academy, supporting those students, again, with grants for the most part. It would not have happened unless we had gone out to leverage money from the community, and the community responded. So it can be done. It can be done. But anyway, it was a wonderful experience. Those kids, the one thing I took away from the experience is those kids are learning more than just art in those schools. They're learning leadership. One of the things that struck me is that when I looked at those little sixth graders and talked to them, they looked me right in the eye when they talked to me. And that was impressive. That's something that we see all too little of these days. So it's a wonderful, wonderful opportunity for kids down there, down at our local public library and other areas on 2nd Street as well. So impressive.
Any additional reports? I've got one. I should let at least the board know, but I was asked by the Scott County Republican Women to make a presentation on the core curriculum. I'm sorry, the Iowa Corps. And so I spent a couple of hours last week trying to learn more about the Iowa Corps and what it represents. And I did make the presentation. The reason I reflect on it, though, is that the earlier discussion about legislators, and there was a lot of discussion about legislators at that meeting, and a lot of discussion about how do people in our community vote, and especially in school board elections. And we all know that school board elections are very poorly attended by our electorate. And so they were asking me, how do we get people more involved? And I think about your questions, Director Kluhl, on getting legislators involved, and I reflect oftentimes on how do we get our community involved, because I think it is in the legislature, and our legislature, I believe, for whatever reason, does not prioritize some of these issues that we think are important, because they're getting lobbied by a lot of other groups, and really strongly lobbied by groups that have a lot of financial interests. So, all right, if that's it for the reports, we'll go on to the information requests. First is a information request, Director DeFau, 10/13/2014. Status of the resurfacing of the North High School tennis courts. Will they be ready for spring tennis season? Director Dickman, 10/13/14, information request. What is the turnaround time for maintenance in the school building? Specifically, how long is it expected to take to fix a leak on bathroom stalls? To fix a lock. Excuse me. Thank you for correcting me. How long is it expected to take to fix a lock on a bathroom stall? Next is an information request from Director Dickman, 10/13/14. What resources do we have for our high school students to encourage volunteerism? Do we have a database or handout? Our staff making students aware of local opportunities and the benefits of volunteering. Thank you very much. There being no other business, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So move.
Is there a second? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
This meeting is adjourned.